Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I didn't charge my headphones, my Beats. So I
Uh-huh.
gotta wear these again.
Yeah, well, that's what I do, I guess.
Yeah, I get me when I used to just normally wear these, I wasn't bothered because I was so used to them, but I haven't
Yeah.
worn them in like several months, so it feels so weird having
Yeah.
these on because they're canceling all the other noise.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of odd not
Yes.
hearing anything in the room, just mainly hearing you. And
Yes.
then just the weight of it, again, it's just kind of off-putting. So
Yeah. Yeah. I understand.
that's my own fault for not charging it. I did something else really stupid too. I um
Oh.
I went to do some Christmas shopping for the staff and I didn't lock
Uh-huh.
up my bike. And then
Oh.
when I went back out, someone stole my bike
Oh
on
man.
Christmas Eve.
Oh. Oh, that sucks, man.
Yeah, it
Oh.
sucks, man. It sucks.
Sorry. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad, but because I can only blame myself, like, what do you really do? And
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, at some point it was bound to happen because every time I go into a store, that's normally what I do. I just leave it outside, trust, and then
Uh,
come back out and it's always there. I've done that for like years and
yeah.
now it finally caught up with me. So,
Wow.
yeah. So that's how my Christmas is going. How about you?
Well, mine's okay. I feel like I'm still recovering from a couple of days of too much eating and not enough sleep and all that. So I'm feeling the effects of it, but nothing like having my bike stolen. So
Mhm.
that's good. Um, yeah, it's been okay.
Okay. Yeah. Just to set the show, this is Seán Weathers. This is
And
the
this
voice you're
is
hearing of Sean. And
and this is Angus Kohm.
all right. Again, Sean Weathers and
Angus Kohm.
okay. Hopefully you guys can keep track of those voices since we don't really have the visuals. Um, we might bring back in the visuals at some point again. Not sure when, but if we do, then I'll definitely maybe have some props and some things to make my location look better. Maybe have a better setup. But for now, we're just gonna go with the footage related to the movies we're watching. So.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of a different show for you guys. We with the holidays going on, we didn't really want to try to squeeze in an in-depth review of the next film we're doing, which is going to be Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. It won out the poll, barely beating out Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. But we want to, just really dive into that movie. So we're not going to necessarily dive into a movie now. We're going to do something a little different, more so like a year in review show. And we're going to just look back at the films we reviewed, give our opinion of solely focusing on the films we reviewed, who were the maybe our top directors, actors, and films, specifically of the pool of films we watched, and just giving you guys our thoughts and just generally, talking about what's happened and where we plan on going with the podcast.
Yes.
Okay. So, without further ado, I guess we can start off. So we're going to try to format this as similar to our regular show as possible. So for our closer look section where we're deep diving in, which is just a section we started last week, we're going to look at the top films we reviewed, the top 5 films. For our overrated, underrated section, again, a section we just started last week, we're going to look at the top 5 filmmakers to see if we think they're overrated or underrated. And for our spotlight section, which again we just started last week, we're going to spotlight the top 5 actors from the films we've watched and dive a little bit deeper into them. And that'll complete the first section of the podcast, which is the explored section. And then with the rewind section, where normally Angus would take the lead and break down the film in detail, sometimes in great detail, sometimes he just guns through like the first 2 acts and then asks me my thoughts and goes over like 5 seconds of the film and asks me my thoughts. But for that section, Angus will then take the lead and he'll go over our previous shows and we'll just, briefly talk about our previous episodes, maybe add in some thoughts we didn't get a chance to add when we initially did them. But as per usual, we kind of start off with a little banter and end with a little banter. So the starting off banter is going to be talking about some of the comments and feedback we've gotten, because I was finally able to finish all of the comments on YouTube from the people who watched the videos and commented on them. And then also we'll end it talking about, where things may go in 2024 with the podcast. And that those, again, the banter that starts and ends the show is part of the No Rooms Film School podcast, the extended version. And then the part that kind of cuts out the fat, that just talks about the episode, that is more so the uh, reviewed and analyzed and explained version. So those are all the different sections. Just a reset again for those who've watched and may not be clear how we break down the sections, and for those who are listening for the first time. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm not sure how many comments you were able to get through. I finished them today. Uh, it started off very negative because we've been doing this for, I think, November of last year. And we didn't really reply to any of the comments for the entire time until a few weeks ago, I think it was, where I was like, hey, we should really focus on these. So there was a lot to go through. There was a lot of negativity. A lot of the negativity came. And I always try to look at this in a positive light. Again, being a manager, you don't want to be negative. So I'm trying to use those manager skills as I do this stuff, and my directing skills, and try to apply it here and try to look for the positive in it and try to put myself in the place of these commenters. You don't want to just dismiss anyone who doesn't like you as toxic or trolls or anything like that. So a lot of negativity came in that a lot of the movies we talk about, they're great movies. That's the reason we did this podcast. That's the whole premise of the podcast, is looking at the best movies throughout space and time. Space meaning all over the world, time meaning from the beginning of cinema to current contemporary films today. And as we're being so selective, we're picking out really, really good movies, good to great to all-time greats. And there's going to be a large community of people who view each movie we look at as the greatest movie they've ever seen, and there's absolutely no flaw, nothing negative can be said about it. And I kind of realized in that when you review a movie that's not new, not very new, that anything negative you say is going to upset people, because the only thing people will accept criticism for is a movie that's now coming out, because opinions aren't formed. When you talk about movies that have been around for a while, opinions are already formed. And the people with the formed opinions are going to be the ones that are clicking on the video. And who's someone who doesn't like the movie would click on your video? So that logic only says the more clicks you get are going to be from the people who like the film the most. And they're not going to want to hear any negativity. But if we were reviewing like Barbie or Oppenheimer, people are now forming those opinions. It hasn't really developed like, oh, this cult of people who love it, So they're more willing to accept negative comments because, they may not have seen the movie at all, or maybe they're just now forming their opinions of it. So I think that's where a lot of the negative comments came in. What do you think about that? And what do you think of the reviews you were able to get to, or comments you were able to get to?
Well, I didn't really see the negativity so much. I guess I didn't go all the way back and look at the very old ones, but I didn't see too much negativity. But I totally agree with that, though, that, when you're looking at movies that people love, yeah, they probably are generally wanting to see what you say, as long as it's a positive. They want to hear how great it is, and honestly, I agree. I mean, all these movies we've watched, I like them all. So if we said anything negative, it was not coming from a place of trying to trash the movie. It's just, there might have been some small detail or something that we commented on, but yeah, I don't know. I think that it's definitely a danger when you're looking at movies that people love,
Mhm.
and yeah, I think a lot of people probably do tune in just to see, okay, does this guy agree with me? Does he love this movie as much as I do? And so it could be disappointing if we didn't quite do that.
Yeah. And I try to meet everyone's displeasure or anger with a sense of understanding. Listen, I know where you're coming from. This is where we're coming from. And I think I was able to diffuse most of it,
Oh, good.
and kind of get people to come around a little bit. I think the only two people that stood out, I'm not going to say who they are. One person I had to block because he just wouldn't let go. Um, and I'll just bring up the issues they brought up. And again, I tried to be as diplomatic as I could. I tried to say I understood where they were coming from. Again, everyone except two people really like were kind of fine. One was a complaint about Laura. Laura
Uh,
evidently has a huge fan base. And I'm going to say something, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way. I find that the films that have the largest people that uh, complain or are offended are films that have starlets in them, and the starlets either have a huge fan base of men who worship them as goddesses, straight men, or gay men who just adore them as things of beauty. And I get this from, again, my introduction to these older movies is working at the hotel I work at, which was owned by a person who grew up around this time, who introduced me to these movies in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, a gay man. So I was able to be introduced to a lot of people who were gay, who were of that age, that would spend time in the hotel and just adored these actors and actresses, and that would be their attitude, and I just never understood it because, again, I hope I'm handling this in a delicate way, but I would just, as a straight guy, I just never understood the fascination that a gay man would have with women. But there is that community that just adore women. Judy Garland is someone that really is like huge in the gay community. I don't get it, but there's a strong passion for some of these women. Gene Tierney is one of those women, and again, these older movies kind of hit that type of fan base. And again, I'm not saying this person was or wasn't, but I'm just saying that community tend to be more protective of their idols. Again, I hope I'm not saying this in any kind of offensive way. I don't mean to. I mean, being protective of an idol, I don't think is a negative thing to say in any kind of a way. But again, from my personal experience, like I would see these gay men that were complete. I'm like, dude, if you're gay, like, why aren't you like, focusing on like Rock Hudson or like, whatever, like, because I mean, if I was gay, I'd be like, yeah, where's the hottest guy, but a lot of these, gay men, they were just adored women, I don't know if part of that is like dressing up as a woman, the drag queen stuff, or what it is. I just never got it, and I still don't get it, but I just do know they're very protective of it. And I think that was part of the backlash for that, was with the Laura video and with the all the videos with All About Eve, and just movies that generally had starlets as the main characters in them.
yeah, that makes sense. I can see that.
Mhm. Have you ever, has that resonated with you in any way with the stage stuff you've done or anything like that? Or
Oh well, I'm definitely aware of it. Yeah,
Mhm.
there's definitely a thing.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of gay men do, perhaps even identify with some of these women. They're kind of like role models or something. The woman that they wish they could be in some cases.
I
Um,
don't know. I don't want to play amateur psychologist, but I do know that's where a lot of the negative comments came from, was from the Laura
yeah,
video and the way we talked about Gene Tierney. One person in particular, he kept calling us bozos. He was being very offensive. And I was like, I tried to be diplomatic. I didn't say anything negative to him. Um, but I think his two major issues were that I said Tierney had an affair with JFK when he was with his wife to be. I don't remember the podcast because
right.
again, this is something I replied to weeks ago. We shot that podcast months ago. So I don't know if I said that, whether he was with his wife or not, or whether he was married at the time. I think I emphasized that she had an affair with him. She was married. I guess his point is that he wasn't married, and he was defending her honor, making it seem like she wasn't doing anything bad to be with
Mm.
him. whatever.
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't care. I'm just gonna be 100% honest. We do one movie a week. I do a lot of research. I'm not gonna be an expert on every single person in the movie's lives. I'm not gonna be a complete expert on the genre, an expert on the production. I'm not gonna know every backstage story. I try to do as much research as I can, but I'm coming this from the standpoint of a fan, and I'm trying to be as knowledgeable as I could possibly be. And I think most people appreciate that. I think 90% of the comments are kind of like, oh, I didn't know that. Thanks for showing me this. I love your knowledge, things like that. But if you're going to be like a super expert on something, and I'm bouncing back from genre to genre, and this particular movie that I land on happens to be your favorite movie that you've seen dozens of times, and this actress is your favorite actress, and you know everything about her, and you have posters of her in your room, yeah, you are going to know certain things that I'm not, you know? And I think that we did bring a decent amount of knowledge, but one thing that bothered him is I think I said she died of lung cancer, and I said it was ironic, and maybe might not even be my comment, but maybe me emphasizing how ironic it was because she started smoking because she didn't like how flinty her voice was as a kid or as younger, and then she started smoking to like make her voice more gravelly, and smoking ended up being the cause of her death. Now it turned out
Right.
to be it's emphysema instead of lung cancer, but it's kind of the same point either way.
Hmm.
The cause of her death was because of smoking. Well, because I said lung cancer instead of emphysema, that was a huge issue. And I think the other thing was the affair with JFK. She was married, he wasn't married. Was he dating his wife at the time? I don't fucking know. I mean, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, like there's only so much we're gonna be able to do in a week
Yeah.
for this podcast, and I feel like I do a lot in a week for this podcast. But I mean,
Yeah.
if you're looking for me to be the end all be all source for this stuff, I'm not going to be that. You have Wikipedia. If you want like something that's more in depth, watch a documentary. Otherwise,
Hmm.
we're just trying to do as much as we can. We're film lovers. We love films. We've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of films. We have a certain perspective, and there's only so much we're going to know about a subject coming into it. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said documentaries, but I mean, even documentaries and TV shows that are documentaries, they have teams of people, they have teams of researchers, they have all kinds of people looking at this, and they still get facts wrong. You know, one person can't be expected to be better than a whole team of people. I mean, it just happens. You can't get everything right. I mean, you try, and you know, inevitably you're going to make mistakes, and I think that's just part of the game. And like you said, we're not here to really be experts on everything. We're just here to talk about the movies that we love talking about. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think we're going to make mistakes, and that's that. I mean, I don't know what to say beyond that. It's just you know, sorry, I guess, if we're if we're not always right. But it's certainly not our intention to be wrong. It's not our intention to say offensive things. That's probably the last thing I want to do. But yeah, we're probably going to make mistakes in the future.
Yeah. And again, it's not like we were that far off. You
No.
know, these aren't like drastically different, things that happened, and it didn't change anything. Like,
Hmm.
none of the points we made were drastically changed by these facts being slightly off.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was him in particular, but that movie overall is what got us the most negative reviews. I
Wow.
finally just had to block him from the channel because he was just so persistent, and he was like, "You two bozos," and I'm like, dude.
Yeah. Well, I kind
I
of
mean, if
like
you read
that.
some of the comments I said to him,
So,
like I was so nice to him, like despite the fact that he kept calling us bozos.
yeah. You two bozos.
Yeah.
That has, but what did he want from us though? Like if you kind of apologized and said, "Oh yeah, we made a mistake." I mean, what else does he want?
Mhm.
You
And he was
know?
like, "Yeah, but still, like you shouldn't get that wrong." I'm like, "Dude, how many times can I reply to your different messages?" Like he replied on like 7 or 8 different messages on the different videos we posted. So I mean, why do you keep coming back here? Are you hate watching? Like, I don't get it, it just didn't make sense. If I saw something I didn't like, I wouldn't then watch like several other videos from the same people unless I'm hate watching. So it
Yeah.
just didn't make sense. So that video and that particular person, and then there was one other person, I didn't have to block them, but it was kind of weird, in that he was defending Ed Wood. I'm
Oh,
like, I mean, you're offended that I'm calling Ed Wood a bad filmmaker? That's essentially what he's known for. But there were a few people who really defended Ed Wood. And again, I tried to be diplomatic, so I didn't argue too much with them. I just respected where they were coming from. But honestly, I mean, he was a bad filmmaker. And I don't care like how you feel about him now. I think that there a lot of the people's feelings about him are based on the movie and not the actual person. He wasn't this great person that should have been adored. He was an alcoholic, he was a deadbeat, he ran up bills, he was a sex pervert, he did porno movies towards the end of his career, and his movies were genuinely terrible. I mean, the only fascinating thing about them is how bad they are. But there's this cult following of people that just think he's a good filmmaker that was misunderstood and shunned by Hollywood. Honestly, for someone that bad, he had plenty of movies that he made. Usually, someone who made a movie as bad as he did wouldn't get that many opportunities to keep making movies. So I didn't say any of this in the comments because I didn't want to deal with that. But he's a bad filmmaker. I'm sorry. I don't know any other way to put it.
yeah. Well, you're right. He's known for being a bad filmmaker. He's known for being the worst filmmaker of all time, which may not be true, but that's kind of the title that's been given to him. He's the worst filmmaker of all time. And he would probably be happy with that. He'd probably think that's great. I'm famous. I'm known for this. And I kind of admire him for, sticking to it and getting things done. And not only with movies, but he also wrote a bunch of books and got them published. I mean, he was persistent, and he had a lot of success in spite of his flaws. So, I kind of admire that. I know you may not admire that as much as I do, but I
I
think, okay,
do, and I think we said
yeah,
some positive
yeah,
things about him.
oh
But at the
yeah,
same
for
time,
sure,
he's
for
still a
sure.
terrible filmmaker. Like there are things to like about him, but one of those things to
Yeah,
like about him is not his ability to make a good film. I mean, the
no,
ability to finish films is amazing, and the fact that he
yes,
was about to he was able to finish that many films is commendable. And again, we
yeah,
did say a lot of positive things about him, but the
yes,
idea that one of those positive things is that he's a good filmmaker, I'm sorry, that's not going to be one of those things. Like,
no,
I'm a low budget filmmaker. I know what it's like to finish a film. Anytime I've talked about it in interviews, either written or podcasts, or when I've talked about filmmaking on my own shows, I've always said the goal of an indie filmmaker is to finish a film, not to make a good film, it's to finish a
mhm,
film. Because most indie films don't get finished. For a big Hollywood production, the goal is to make a good film because it's a given you're going to be able to finish it. For an indie
yeah,
filmmaker, the goal is to finish the film. So I've
yeah,
always commended him. Maybe I haven't been as vocal, but finishing a film is a huge accomplishment for an indie filmmaker, and that's absolutely should be commended by Ed Wood. But
yeah.
the other stuff about the quality and the care and the fact that he didn't get enough opportunities and that Hollywood shunned him, no, no, you're not going to get me on the same page with that part of it.
No, I think he had a lot of opportunities. I think he had a lot of chances, and he did what he did. And no, I don't think he was ever going to make a movie like Citizen Kane if people had just given him the right opportunity. I don't think that would have happened.
There are people out there that evidently seem to think like, oh, Hollywood didn't shun him. Hollywood
Yeah,
is full of a bunch of sex perverts and the Illuminati and this and that,
yeah.
and they kept him out. Or if they would have gotten a chance, he would have made a film just as good as XYZ. I'm like, no, no. Hollywood wants to make money. If they felt they could have made money from him, he would have had those opportunities.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So, I mean, again, most of the comments were overwhelmingly positive. Most people were very gracious in their comments. Even the people that said negative things, I think when I met their negativity with understanding and positivity, that it kind of brought them around. But
Mhm.
again, those were the only two negative fan bases, were the fan base for Laura and the fan base for Ed Wood. And I think like 90% of the negative comments came from the Laura video. Maybe 80% came from that. Maybe 15% came from All About Eve, and maybe a few percentages came from the Ed Wood fans. I'm not sure about the math,
Yeah.
but those are where most of the negative comments came from those three sets of videos, mainly from Laura, then Eve, and then Ed Wood. So
So who'd have thought that we would provide a connection between the fan base of Laura and the fan base of Ed Wood? Those two fan bases agree on one thing. They hate
we're
us.
bozos.
That's right. We are bozos.
Yeah, I could definitely see the line between Laura and Betty Davis and All About Eve, and that was kind of my
Yes.
point when I first started talking.
Yes.
But yeah, the Ed Wood fan base, yeah, that's a weird connection. But yeah, two bozos on the internet.
That's right.
Yeah, but again, all of the comments, again, overall, were incredible. There were some people that said, "Hey, I love this video. I'm going to check out the rest of your videos." And there were people that were just thrilled that I took the time to write some comments back to them. Some of the comments, like I spent time with it. Like some of the comments were like a paragraph long. If someone's like going to write you a detailed, reply, you want to, be gracious and do the same thing. So hopefully they
Mhm.
appreciated that. I did spend a lot of time over it the last few weeks doing it. So I definitely appreciate them. Hopefully they realize, it's a two-way street. If they're going to spend time watching our videos and make comments, I'm going to spend time like going over their comments and giving them genuine replies. And I did wait a long time to get to these, but I promise I will keep up to date with the comments moving forward. So thank you guys. It's been an awesome year. Again, the support's been overwhelming. We're still an incredibly small channel. So I'm not delusional. We are really small, really, really small. And some of the views have digressed, but overall, it's just been a lot of growth over the last year. And I'm happy with the progress we've made, and I'm happy with the fans that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was trying to make some comments or reply to some comments. I haven't done as much as you, nowhere near as much, and it's something I will continue to try and keep up with. I was mainly, as I was sharing the videos, I was trying to look at the comments and respond to them. So there's still a lot of old videos that I haven't shared on Twitter, on our Twitter account. So, you know, hopefully I will get to more of those. But I totally appreciate anybody who comments. And, on Twitter, it's the same thing. If people comment, I will respond, because I think it's important. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to, what do you want to go to first? Top films, top filmmakers, top actors. Which section do you want to hit up next?
Well, why not top films?
Okay. So these are going to be, so we haven't touched base on this. You saw my list. I haven't seen yours.
Yes.
So we're not going to go over the films we touched on in the top essential lists, because I mean on those lists we would go over like 10 to 15 movies. It was just a ridiculous amount of movies. And there was no way we spent enough time on those movies dissecting them to really be able to include them in this list. So this is only once we change the format of the podcast to focus on one movie at a time instead of a list of 10 plus additional movies. So I will just briefly go over the movies that are eligible for this list, and then we'll just start off with number five on both of our lists. So the films that are eligible, starting with the most recent, is Die Hard, The French Connection, The Black Phone, Out of the Past, The Asphalt Jungle, The Exorcist, The Descent, Vampire, The Brown Bunny, Rashomon, Primer, Solaris, My Brother's Wife, Blazing Saddles, Laura, A Woman Under the Influence, The Seventh Seal, The King of Comedy, The Wild Bunch, and All About Eve. Again, we'll dive deep into this later with your section, but I just wanted to briefly go over them. Would you like me to start, or do you want to start?
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the first list that we're doing is um, a closer look, and these are the top five films. And my list is going to start with Rashomon. This is an all-time great movie. I think most of these films we listed are all-time greats. It was difficult for me for the end of my list, four and five, because once I got through the first three, I'm like, holy cow, there's so many great movies here, and I'm only
Yeah,
picking five. I'm like,
yeah,
this is insane how great these
yeah,
movies are and how many movies I'm letting off this list. So once I finished the first three, which came pretty quickly, it came down to the last two. And what I said with the last two was, could the history of cinema be told without including this movie? And I feel the history of cinema could not be told without including Rashomon. The format has been done and redone at nauseum. The movie's been analyzed by scholars. It put Akira Kurosawa on another level as far as an all-time great filmmaker. And again, this was a tough decision because again, once I got to four and five, there were so many great movies. But what it came down to for me with Rashomon was I do not feel the history of cinema could be told without including this film.
yes. I think you're right about that. Um, so, am I going with my number five at this point?
Well,
So
first
how
of
was?
all, is Rashomon on your list?
No, it is not on my top five.
Okay, this
But
podcast is over. I'm looking for a new partner.
yeah, well, I agree
No,
with that.
it's a tough list.
Yeah,
Tough list.
yeah, I
No, you
agree
give
with every
yours and you give your rationale. Yeah.
my number five.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So again, everything you said about how tough this is, and all of these films, I mean, they could almost all go in the top five, and honestly, the order is not really that set in stone for me in terms of number five, number four, number three.
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed. It's
but
tough.
yeah, but and I commented earlier that there's a difference between favorite and best, and so that's always difficult as well.
I will
But
say this, when we're picking from this list, favorite or best doesn't really matter. When we're talking overall and every movie we've ever seen is included, and then you bring up a movie like Rocky 4 or something, I'll be like, are you crazy? But you'll be like, no, I watched Rocky 4 like 100 times. Then
yeah,
favorite and best can be gray area, and it can be like, whoa, favorite and best, huge difference. But with a list
yeah,
of only great movies, with the exception of like a couple that aren't great, I don't think favorite or best even matters.
yeah. Well, you're probably right, and I do think that it intersects a little bit with probably most of my choices. It's the movies that I kind of feel a personal connection to, that maybe I've known a long time, and they're also great movies. They may have fared a little better than some of the ones that I wasn't as familiar with. So anyway, my number five, I went with The Seventh Seal, which is a movie that I did see when I was probably 18, 19, and it blew my mind, it blew me away, and it really stuck with me. And I watched it a few times over the years, and again, I think it's hugely influential. I think a lot of people have imitated it or made fun of it in a loving way, and I just think it's a great film, and I do feel that personal connection with it. So I had to put it in the top five.
Interesting. My number four is The Seventh Seal.
Yeah, so we're not far off there then.
No, we're not. And again, as I previously said, four and five were very close.
Yeah,
Because it was kind of my same rationale. The first three were I picked them for a different reason. But four and five I picked for the exact same reason. Could the history of cinema be told without this film? And it's pretty much for the same reasons as Rashomon. I don't feel you could tell the history of film without the Seventh Seal. And again, the order, who really cares? Who really knows? I mean, these are five of the greatest movies ever made. I mean, I just listed off, how many films did I list off? I listed off
20.
uh 20, and maybe 15 of them are some of the greatest movies ever made. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, with the Seventh Seal, I mean, again, order really doesn't matter too much. I kind of gave it a little bit of edge over Rashomon because while Rashomon dissected what is true, the Seventh Seal was more so about philosophy and other things, and I kind of prefer that debate over the truth debate. They're both really good debates, but I kind of preferred the existential debate with the Seventh Seal a little bit more than the what is truth with Rashomon. But again, we're splitting hairs, splitting hairs.
Yeah. And as far as Rashomon goes, for me, that's an example of a movie that I did not see when I was young, although I saw versions of that story, as we talked about, told in other, TV shows and stuff, but I didn't see the actual movie Rashomon until very recently. So it doesn't quite have that same, lifelong connection. And maybe if I see it a few more times over the years, it will become higher on my list. But obviously a great movie, but it just doesn't have the personal connection for me. But moving on to my number four, I picked The Wild Bunch, which, what can you say? It's a great movie. Again, hugely influential. And I did see it many, many years ago, blew me away, stuck with me. I've watched it a few times over the years, and it never gets old. In fact, it just gets better every time I watch it. I see more in it, I see more detail, and yeah, I just like everything about it. What more can I say?
Yeah, it's a great one. And again, like I said, I mean, with these 20 movies, right, there's at least 15 of them are some of the greatest movies ever made. And when I'm, again, like I said, when you're talking favorites or best, when you're picking from this pool, it doesn't matter. So for me, my mentality wasn't favorite or best. It was like, which of these films did I just see? I already knew they were all great. I think I saw pretty much all of them multiple times before we did this. For me, it was like when I rewatched this after I've already established in my mind it's already one of the all-time great movies. Like, how does my mind process it now? Do I like say, oh, yeah, I remember seeing this movie before, or it's just as good, maybe a little bit better, maybe not as good, maybe a little bit worse. Um, these top three, they're my top three because after I saw them, I'm like, holy shit, I got to just hit play again and watch this movie right over again. For me, these three aren't necessarily any better than the others, but when I watched them, I'm like geeking out and I'm like doing all these reactions to myself sitting alone watching it. And I'm just so excited. And it's the Wild Bunch for me. It's the Wild Bunch.
Wow.
When I watched this
Yeah.
movie, I knew I loved it. But when I rewatched it, I'm like, oh my God, like why didn't I rewatch this more times? It was just so exciting for me to rewatch it. And I was just like, this is a no-brainer for me. It's not that I think, again, it's any better than any other film in my top five or any other film I didn't choose. It's just the excitement of when I rewatched it, how good it was and how much emotion it evoked inside of me.
Yeah, totally. Great movie. So moving on to my number three. This one might be somewhat controversial, but for me, it's again, it
The
has a bit
Descent.
of a no, no,
I know.
no,
My brother's wife.
no, no, no. My number three is All About Eve,
Oh,
and for
it's because of your
me,
background, isn't it?
it is. Yeah, I come from the theater world. I've spent a lot of years in the theater world, and I'd forgotten. I mean, I saw this movie many, many years ago. Thought it was a great movie. And when I rewatched it for the podcast, I don't know why, but I'd forgotten how much it was about the theater world. And it just resonated so much with me because when I first saw it, I hadn't really had a lot of experience in theater. But after spending more than 20 years in theater, this just seemed all the more brilliant to me. And I think it's one of the best scripts ever written. I think the script is amazing. I think the performances are amazing. The cast is amazing. Um, The only flaw might be in the actual filmmaking itself. It's very static in a way, as we talked about. But that didn't bother me. I just think it's such a good script, and it just speaks to me so much. I had to include it in my top five.
That was one of the hardest films for me to leave out of my top five
Wow.
because Betty Davis is, you know how I feel about Betty Davis.
Yes.
Anyone who's listened to any of my shows knows anytime she comes up how I feel about Betty Davis. I love the movie, I love the script, I love the dialogue. But when it comes to nitpicking, the shortcomings, when it has such obvious shortcomings, and yeah, and you're nitpicking of all these great movies, it just couldn't make it into my top five. But it was tough to leave out because it is an all-time great classic.
Yeah. Totally. And I understand where you're coming from on that, but for me, I guess as a writer as well, I just had to. I think the writing is second to none in this movie.
So Eve was your number three, right?
Yes.
So we're up to my number two.
Yes.
Okay. All right. My number two, again, it's a movie that I saw. And again, I saw most of these movies before multiple times. When I saw this movie, I just couldn't get over how visually stunning it was, and how much it evoked thought in my brain. I felt like I was in a museum where it's not just the visuals. I mean, there's so many great movies that we saw with visuals. Vampire, amazing visuals. There's so many movies we saw with great story, all about Eve. But those movies didn't make my list because they didn't combine them the way that this film did. I think of all the movies on this list, this is the one film that, um, if the pool was bigger, it would still be top five, um, and that is Solaris. And what kills me is that this is supposed to be Tarkovsky's like one of his lesser films. This is a film he didn't even like that much. I cannot wait to explore his work even more. I'm just so excited. This movie was amazing. It was stimulating. It was thought-provoking. It was a masterpiece.
Yes. I agree with you. 100%. Masterpiece. It's brilliant. I'm going to admit it didn't make my top five, but the only reason it didn't is because it was new to me. And so I've only seen it once, and I feel like I need to see it again, maybe even a third time, before I could really say, yeah, this is definitely. But I mean, I thought about it. It's that good. I thought about putting it in the top five, but I just decided I had to go with movies that I had a longer history with. So, yeah, I agree. It's absolutely brilliant, and I look forward to seeing it again in the future. My number two is, again, going back to the idea of favorites, and being extremely influential in my life. This movie, I think it is a masterpiece. I think it's very, very good. But I also saw it when I was 12 years old, and it had a huge effect on me. And that movie is The Exorcist. So for me, that's like, life changing. Seeing The Exorcist when I was 12, there's kind of horror before The Exorcist and horror after The Exorcist. And, it's a movie I've never gotten tired of. I've watched many, many times. And it's still effective, watching it today. I think it still works. I think it's a great movie. And I can call it a personal favorite as well. So I had to include it. And that's why it's my number two.
It hurts me not to include William Friedkin in my list because we've done two of his movies, two of his better movies, and he's such a huge impact on me based on all the behind the scenes stuff, the commentary, the interviews, people talking about him talking about himself in his movies. I think when we're talking about like filmmakers that have influenced me or people that inspire me or people who make movies similar to the movies I want to make, I think then, The Exorcist and, um, would be number two, and The French Connection would be number one. But that's not what we're doing right now. I'm not going to go with man, this is the type of movies I want to make. I'm going to go with the movies that affected me the most. And it hurt me not to have one of his movies on the list, and it hurt me not to have The Exorcist on my list. But unfortunately, Freakin' is not on my list. But I just wanted to acknowledge him and his work and how much I loved the two movies of his that we covered. Also, because it's going to be unlikely we're going to cover any more of his work anytime soon, if we cover any more for this podcast. Um, my number one, I'm going to go recency biased. This is one of the more recent movies we saw, and when I saw it, it kind of hit me like, wow, every movie on this list I liked. Some of the movies I loved. This movie I liked, but I admit 100% I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I heard the praise. It didn't click with me. When I saw it again, Eureka, Out of the Past. This is one of the greatest
Yes.
film noirs ever made. There are flaws in it. There's flaws in almost every movie you can mention. Probably the most flawless movie here might be Solaris. But every movie has its flaws. There are some nitpicking I can do about it, but there's just so much overwhelmingly good things in this movie, and it's so dense with the dialogue, and there's so many elements of film noir in this. And I love film noir, and for this to have like 99% of everything that makes film noir good is in this movie, how could it not make my list, and how could it not be number one?
Wow. Yeah, I agree. It's a great movie, and it pains me to say that I did not include it in my top five because it is exactly the kind of movie I love. I love film noir. I love the cast. This is a great movie, but I don't quite have as much of a relationship with it, and yeah, again, it doesn't quite have the same pull for me as some of the others on this list. But it is a very very good movie. And I did consider it for the top five. I just decided I had to go with things that were a little more personal. And with that in mind, my number one could be another controversial choice. But for me, this is the most, probably the most influential movie on me ever. I saw this movie as a kid and loved it, watched it every chance I got. And I didn't even
Hang on,
realize it
let me
was.
see if I can guess the movie. Let me look at this list.
Okay.
So I got a clue that I thought it would have been all about Eve because of your stage experience and writing. So I'm assuming this is going to have something to do with writing. And you said you saw it as a kid, so it's going to be one of the older movies. So one of the movies that pops out in my head, you don't have to give me any clues. I'm only going to make one guess. I'm going to go
Okay.
process of elimination.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I know what it is. I'm going to say this movie has to be, based on what's left on this list, based on what you have on this list, it has to be Blazing Saddles.
You're absolutely correct. It is
Yes.
Blazing Saddles. And, as I grew up and I started writing plays and sketches, and I became a satirist. I would write satire, I would write spoofs of things. And, I don't know why, but I didn't make the connection until I sort of watched Blazing Saddles again as an adult, and I went, "Oh my God, this is where it all comes from." This is really probably what made me into who I am in a lot of ways. I just thought this movie was brilliant. I loved it. And the thing is, it's a comedy. And I think as a comedy, it doesn't get as much respect as a lot of other films. Comedies tend not to win big awards, but the truth is comedy is really hard to do. It's really hard to do well. And for a comedy to be done this well and to still work as well as it does 50 years later, this movie is still funny. It still makes me laugh. And I think it's still edgier and more interesting than a lot of other movies that come out today. So, yeah, this movie, for my personal connection and just how much I love it, and it had to be my number one. There was just no other.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, listen, I could have randomly picked movies out of a hat and told you why these made my top five, with the exception of, My Brother's Wife and like The Descent. It'd be stuff like that. But I saw, and those are, not that those are bad movies, but they're kind of in a different league with these other movies. Oh God, he just offended two fan bases. Oh
Yeah.
God.
Oh no.
There goes the comment section.
Yes.
But in terms of overrated, underrated, I would say, again, I picked the Seventh Seal and Rashomon because of their historical importance, and they are historically cited a lot, and I feel they are properly rated. Um, I feel Solaris. I'm going to say underrated. I'm going to
Mhm.
say underrated because the filmmaker himself kind of thought this was his lesser projects. And I don't know how great his other movies are, but there's no way that this should be the lesser work on any level. I'm going to say Solaris is underrated. Out of the Past is considered the greatest film noir ever made, so it's not underrated. And it made my number one, so I don't think it's overrated either. And I'm going to say Wild Bunch, underrated. I think it should be a little bit higher in terms of the all-time Westerns. Maybe that Unforgiven, uh, The Searchers, Good, Bad, and the
Mhm.
Ugly. It's definitely top five
Yeah.
greatest
Yeah.
Westerns. I'm gonna say underrated for Wild Bunch and underrated for Solaris. I don't think any of these movies were overrated. What about your
Mhm.
list?
Yeah, I wouldn't say any of them are overrated. I think, yes, I could see your point about the Wild Bunch maybe not quite being, doesn't quite get talked about as much as some of the other Westerns. So it could be a little bit underrated. Um, I think, I don't think that All About Eve is really underrated. Um, I don't think it's overrated. The Exorcist, again, I don't think it's overrated and I don't think it's underrated. I think it gets a lot of attention and I think it deserves it. The only one that I might say is slightly underrated is Blazing Saddles because a lot of people will say that they think that Young Frankenstein is his best film. And I love Young Frankenstein, but I have to say I haven't watched it as much and I don't love it as much as Blazing Saddles. I think Blazing Saddles has a little more cutting edge material in it. Um, but maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. But for me, it's my favorite of the Mel Brooks movies, and so maybe it is slightly underrated, but only very slightly.
Okay. And I clearly just messed up the sections because this was supposed to be a closer look section.
Oh,
Now it's the overrated or underrated section.
yeah.
Oh
Oh
well.
well, there are no
Um,
rules here.
you're
There.
damn right there are no rules. Because if they were.
Yes.
Okay, so what do you want to do next? Top filmmakers or top actors?
Um, well, maybe go for top five actors because it's a little bit different.
Okay. Top five actors. Okay. So obviously we've seen I've already listed the movies we've seen.
Mhm.
And these are going to be the top actors within these 20 movies we've looked at that have stood out for their performances. And for me, generally any list I make, once I get to the start getting to the end of the list, that's where it gets hard. So when I did the top five films, four and five were really hard for me. When I did the top five actors, the first four were pretty easy. Number five was very difficult. I will say it became down to the person I picked and Kurt Douglas. And Kirk Douglas, I love him. He was in a couple of movies I love, Spartacus and Paths of Glory, two Kubrick films. So I've seen those movies a lot because Kubrick is my favorite filmmaker. He's obviously in Out of the Past, and he's been in a few other great films. But I don't think I watched those movies specifically for him. And as great of an actor as he is, he doesn't quite have the range. He's kind of a similar character in a lot of his films. So I wouldn't say I go out of my way to watch a movie because he's in it. I most also watch those films because they're Kubrick films. He was great in them. And like I said, he would have been number six. But the person that just edged him out was William Holden.
Mm,
I think he did a
yeah.
great performance in The Wild Bunch and The Bridge Over River Kwai, Network. Um, and he did a few other movies that I kind of liked that were also great, like Sabrina and Born Yesterday, I think was another one. And a few other like really seminal type films, Staglight 17 or something like that.
Oh
Um,
yes.
but yeah, he's been in a lot of great movies, but the first few are the really ones that stood out to me. He's on my list because of Network, because obviously of this movie that's on that we did for the podcast, The Wild Bunch and The Bridge Over River Kwai. I think he was great in those movies, and like I said, he barely beat out Kirk Douglas for number five for me. A very stoic actor. Again, like Kirk Douglas, not a huge amount of range, but he has his a younger him was this charismatic playboy who would just like, sweet talk women. The older him was this grizzled guy who's seen a lot of shit. He was kind of like a more handsome version um of Humphrey Bogart. It's like this guy's
Mm,
seen a lot of shit, you know?
yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So he had these kind of two phases where I feel like Kirk Douglas just kind of had the one phase. Nitpicking, but for me it's Holden.
Okay. Well, yeah, he was definitely great in The Wild Bunch, and yeah, he's great in other movies as well. Um, I did not put him on my list, but I think I was solely going for, uh, the performances in these movies. Which ones stood out to me, so I wasn't necessarily looking at the whole career. Um, so I may have picked some controversial people here so, that aren't necessarily who most people think of, but people who jumped off the screen for me in these particular roles in these movies. Um, and so my number five was Clifton Webb as Waldo Lydecker in Laura. I really enjoyed him in this. I thought he was great. I love the character as well, but I think he did a great job as this character. He just embodied it. And again, maybe it's partly that he's a writer, and there's something to that that I just find appealing. But I just loved watching him and listening to him in the movie Laura.
That's interesting. We didn't discuss how we were going to pick actors.
No,
That would drastically change my list if we're only looking at the performances in these movies.
yeah,
Should we adjust on the fly?
well, if you'd like,
Huh. Because someone like that would never win for me
no,
if we encompass their whole careers. But
yes,
if we're only looking at these movies,
yeah,
huh, that changes a lot.
yeah.
Huh. So if we were only looking at these movies, would I still go with William Holden at number five? That's a good question. That's a good one. So that changes a lot, man.
Wow. Well, again, this is the no rules film school, so
Yeah,
we can be working with different criteria.
that's true. So you know what?
Yeah,
Holden was good though. He was good in this movie specifically.
he was. Yeah,
He was really good.
yeah.
Leader of the Wild Bunch.
Yeah.
That's ooh, that's tough, man. That's you threw a wrench into my plans
Yeah.
here.
Well, I had no idea. I thought it was like, we're giving out the awards for the
You see, because
movies
if we
and
do
performances.
this,
Yeah.
really, all five of my actors could be from All About Eve.
Yeah.
Because there
Yeah.
were some really good performances in All About Eve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and he was good in Laura.
Yes.
You know what? I'll adjust my list. I'm gonna still go with William Holden because
Okay.
he was the leader of He's the leader of
Oh
the
yeah,
Wild Bunch, man. He's the leader of the
he was
Wild Bunch.
he was great. Yeah.
He was great. So, I'm going to put the people towards the top of my list, so I have more
Okay.
time to rethink the other people on my list.
Okay.
So I may change a few things. Who I'm not going to change is number
Okay.
one, which is
Okay.
Max von Sydow.
Ah, yes.
He was one because he was in two movies. He double dipped, So he was in The
True.
Exorcist.
Yes, you're right
Um,
now.
so that's kind of the reason why he's number one by default because he was in two movies. He was in The Exorcist and he was in The Seventh Seal, and it showed his range.
Yes.
Even though he was still young, I think we commented like we were shocked at how young he was when we saw his age in The Seventh
Yes.
Seal because his face didn't look of a young man.
No.
And then he goes in The Exorcist, he puts on the old man makeup and he plays an old man. So he showed incredible range with the two parts. And I think he was a central character, obviously, in The Seventh Seal. And also, he was kind of the main character because he bookmarked the film in The Exorcist.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
kind of him with the showdown on Tefulu or whatever the devil that demon was. Tefulu.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm offending another fan base.
Probably, yes, probably.
Yeah, Tefulu, man, that's his name. Yeah, that
Yeah.
Tefulu guy. um, but, uh, but yeah, Max von Sydow, and I'll rethink the rest of my list. But he was my
Okay.
number one.
Yeah.
Again, double dipped. So
Yeah. Well, now you're throwing a monkey wrench in for me because, again, I was looking at it as which is the great performance. And so when you said Max von Sydow, I just thought, oh, from The Seventh Seal, and I didn't think, wait a minute, he's in two movies. And if we can consider both performances, then he might have made my list, but he didn't make my list because I was picking for
no
specific
rules, no
performances.
rules.
I
I'm
know.
changing
No
mine on
rules.
the fly.
Yeah.
You told me
No.
only the list on these
Yes.
movies, and he's in
Yes.
two
Oh
movies
yeah.
on this list.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean that is a very good thought, and yeah, I mean, I could have picked him, but I didn't. Do you want me to keep going with my number four, or should I jump up to number one on my list?
No, however you want to do it, there are no rules, my friend.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll go up to number four because I feel that it kind of follows my number five quite well. And this maybe will come as no surprise because I was very excited about him when we talked about this movie. But my number four is George Sanders as Addison DeWitt in All About Eve because I just loved that performance, loved the character too, but his performance was perfect. And I have to say that when it comes down to the climactic scene between him and Eve, where he really tells her off, I just think that's one of the greatest and most satisfying scenes I've ever witnessed. He's so good in that moment. So I had to include George Sanders, and I put him at number four.
Mm, that's a good one, man. I just want to tell you that movie is so tough because everyone is so good in that movie. That is the
Yes,
strength of that movie is the writing and the performances. And
yes.
yeah, how do you even pick one? Can I pick the whole cast? Can I cheat? That is tough.
Well, there's no rules, so you probably could.
So
You
this is
probably,
what would have been my number four if I went in order and I
yeah,
didn't jump to the top of my list because I wanted to rethink it. Well, this would have been my number three. But either way, I was gonna go with Betty Davis.
yes,
Um, because she's my favorite actress and she's in All About Eve. However, if we're only talking about this list and I can't look at her whole career, I don't even know if she's the best performance in All About Eve, honestly. Because George Sanders was really good as well. I
yeah,
agree. I love Sanders in that movie.
yeah.
I think it was Children of the Corn or was it Village of the Damned?
Oh,
No, not
Village of the
Children of the Corn.
Damned.
Is it Village of the Damned or Children of the Damned?
Children of the Damned. Yeah, I don't
Whichever
know
was the
which.
first one. He
I
was in
think it
that
was.
and he was great in that one.
Yeah, I think it was Village of the Damned.
Village of that. Whichever was the
I
first
think.
one, he was in that.
Yeah.
And he
Okay.
was
Yeah.
great in that, and he's been great in a lot of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so would Betty Davis even be my favorite performance from that movie? I just don't even know.
Yeah.
I'm in
Yeah.
flux right now.
Yeah.
So Can I take the coward's way out and pick someone else from this list? I will. I will take the coward's way out, and I'll pick
Okay.
someone else, and I'll
Okay.
rethink who I want from that movie because I got to pick at
Okay.
least one person from that movie.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna go with Robert De Niro.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
was gonna make my list either way,
Yeah.
whether we counted these movies or not. Um, I think The King of Comedy is probably it's a great movie. It was
Yeah.
probably one of the lesser movies in these top 20, but he was
Hmm.
great in this movie. And to think he
Yes.
did this in Taxi Driver in this like a similar time range.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was great. Uh,
Yeah.
he he yeah, I mean, he's Robert De Niro. I mean, what can you
Yes.
say? So yeah, Robert De Niro and The King of Comedy.
Yeah. And yeah, spoiler alert here. I did include him in my top five as well,
Hmm.
um, for the same reasons that he's just so good. And I think this particular role, it's so different, because we often see him in kind of a tough guy role where he's kind of in command, he kind of knows what he's doing. And Rupert Pupkin is just so different. He's so uncool. He's so inept in a way, although, in some ways he's not. But I don't know. It's a very, in a way, it was a risky character for him to play, I think, at that point in his career. And whether it worked or not in terms of audience, but it's a great, great performance. And yeah, so he did make my list. I'll hold back on saying where exactly I placed him, and I'll go to my number three because I did five and four, and so this is going to kind of play into what you're talking about here because my number three, I decided to go with Anne Baxter as Eve Harrington in
Hmm.
All About Eve. So I'm kind of playing this game too of All About Eve is such a strong
I mean,
cast.
we
It's
can
such
we can universally
yeah,
agree.
yeah,
As far as like if there was a cast award, it would easily
yeah,
go to All About Eve.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I almost thought I could pit all five of them. I actually thought about that, but I didn't do five, but I did. I had George Sanders at four. I have Ann Baxter at three. Um, do you want me to go on with my number two?
No, we're going back and forth, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
if you're ready, if you're ready.
Yeah. So so this is tough for me, right? Because there are two
Yeah.
people before
Yes.
we had the discussion that were undoubtedly going to make my list without question. And
Yeah.
that was going to be Betty Davis and Toshiro Mifune because they
Yes.
are our top 10 favorite actors of all time with
Yeah.
their bodies of work.
Yeah.
There are two actors who would never make my list if we were talking about full bodies of work.
Right.
And those two actors that I really have to strongly consider now.
Yeah.
I'm just talking out loud at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's gonna have to be Linda Blair,
Oh yes.
and this is so tough. So who do I take out if I put Linda Blair in there? That's my God, these dilemmas,
I
man.
know it's impossible, right? This is why I don't do well at top five lists and top 10 lists. It's
You know
just
who the other person is who would never make my list if we didn't go out of this realm is Vincent Gallo.
oh yeah, yeah.
Vincent Gallo is great in that movie.
He is.
Ah, they'd never make my list if it wasn't for these very specific circumstances.
Yeah.
Christ. Christ.
Man, who
I'm
knew?
gonna have to give it up to Linda Blair. I mean, a
Yeah.
child
Yeah.
did all that.
Yeah.
I don't know who I'm kicking off this list, but Linda Blair's on my list. She has to
That's
be.
great. Yeah.
Linda
Yeah.
Blair.
Awesome. I have to admit I very very strongly considered putting her on the list, but I decided not to. And she is one of my favorites, as I've mentioned a few times. I've been a fan of hers since seeing The Exorcist, but also loved her '80s movies like Savage Streets, Chained Heat. Um, so yeah, I did consider it, but um, and she is great in The Exorcist, but I ultimately did not include her. So my number two, just to continue on with the theme here, is
Mhm.
Betty Davis as Margot
Mm.
Channing in All About Eve. So I have three from All About Eve, and I was kind of like, well, shouldn't I have four? But no, I stopped at three. So Betty Davis, I had to include her. What can you say? I think she's great in this, and we all know she does have a great body of work. But this, I thought she was great in this. I thought she was perfect, really. So I had to include her.
Mhm. So I have two more people left, or one?
Uh, oh gosh.
I
Well,
have
recap.
one.
One
I
left.
have,
Yeah.
I have Holden, De Niro, Linda Blair, Max von Sydow.
Oh yes. So you
Oh
have
my
one left.
God. This
Oh
is
no.
insane. So
Yeah.
am I really gonna have no one from All About Eve on my list? You know
Well.
what? I'm not gonna have anyone from All About Eve on my list. Part of the problem is no one stands out. Everyone's so good. How do I
Hmm.
pick one person? The only reason I could pick Betty Davis is because I'm thinking body of work. But
Yeah.
when I don't include body of work, everyone's good in that movie and no one stands out, so I can't really pick anyone.
Right.
So I'm gonna have to pass on that movie.
Yeah.
That leaves me with Toshiro Mifune. Um, I'm gonna make a very controversial call here. I'm gonna have to call it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to
All
call it
right.
Vincent
All right.
Gallo.
Vincent Gallo.
Vincent
Wow.
Gallo. He
Who'd have
basically
thought?
gave up his whole life for this movie.
Yeah.
His whole life and his whole career took a different trajectory after he made this movie. He gave this movie his everything.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a brilliant performance. And if we're only looking at these lists of movies, I have to put him in here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's admirable. I respect that. I did not obviously include him, but I can understand why you would, though. He was very, very good in that.
Mhm.
No doubt about it. Um, no doubt. And I guess you already know who my number one is,
Hang on,
because
do I? Do I? Hang
yeah,
on, let me see.
because
Let me say.
Robert. Okay,
Oh, Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro. Yeah,
You
because
said
I already.
Robert. I was gonna look at the
Yeah,
list, but yeah,
yeah.
you did say
Well,
you were coming back to him, so I would have
I
figured it
did.
out anyway.
So yeah, he's my only. Yeah. And again, the numbers are not necessarily right. If I had time, I might move them around. I don't know, but I have him at number one. You know, and I do think it's a great performance. I think one of the reasons to watch The King of Comedy is Robert De Niro's amazing performance as Rupert Pupkin. And yeah, what more can I say?
Okay. All right, so for a quick recap, my list was drastically altered because I was thinking careers. Um, Obviously, as we got into it, I did a audible and I switched it to only focus on these films. I still went with William Holden. He was my number five either way. The leader of the Wild Bunch, grizzled performance. He took them into that gunfire. He did action. He did character. We got to see him react to a bunch of different things, betrayals, disappointments. He was just an unbelievable performance. William Holden, number five. Number four, Robert De Niro playing against type, doing an amazing performance. A young De Niro. Linda Blair. I'm not a big a fan of Linda Blair as you are. So for me, this is an isolated performance. She's a child. She does some things that if she didn't pull it off well, it would affect the quality of the film. This film is great because she was able to carry her weight. It wasn't just what she did on screen, but the physical things she had to go through as a child to do this. Some may say it had a lot of negative impact on her as a whole because she did do a lot of drugs and got into a lot of things at an early age. Um, so, again, she's someone that gave a lot. So, for me, it's not just your performance, but how it affected you as a whole, which is kind of why I went with Vincent Gallo as number two as well. It's a good performance, but also how it affected his life and what he gave to make the movie. And then Max von Sydow's number one because, hey, he double dipped. He had two great performances. Everyone else here just had one. You want a
Yeah.
quick recap of your list?
I can do it very quick. Number 5 was Clifton Webb as Waldo Lydecker in Laura. Number 4 was George Sanders as Addison DeWitt in All About Eve.
Theme about those two, both character actors that were kind of like villainous, and those roles. If you swap those actors, they both could have pulled off those roles too.
They could, yeah, and they were both writers. The
Oh,
characters are both writers,
oh.
so yeah, there's definitely a connection there. Number 3 was Anne Baxter as Eve Harrington in All About Eve. Number 2, Betty Davis as Margot Channing in All About Eve. And number 1 was Robert De
And they were
Niro
both
as
up for the same award that
they
year as
were.
well.
They were, yes.
And if Ann Baxter would have backed off and took the supporting award, they would have both had a better chance of winning instead of canceling each other out, which is kind of what happened with me. You kind of
Exactly.
cancel each other out.
Yes, exactly. And my number 1 was Robert De Niro as Rupert Pupkin in The King of Comedy.
Yes. Is that the only overlap we have? Is Robert De Niro?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to have Betty Davis, but well, you changed your mind.
I changed it up. I changed it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we got 5 minutes. We can start the next section and maybe
Sure.
just go through the first two directors and then
Yep.
get back into it, okay?
All
So
right.
the last list we have before we go into the recap is going to be filmmakers. All right. So a lot of good filmmakers here. Uh, maybe we should touch base on criteria before we go over this. So I was thinking full body of work, right?
Yeah.
Obviously,
Well. Yeah, I was just gathering that. Yes. So once again, I was looking more at the director of one of these movies. So I was kind of looking at it specifically for these movies again.
so my
So,
list is completely off. So the fact that
well,
the fact that
or
we have 5 minutes left until our next recording, and then we
yeah.
get that 10-minute break, I'm going to be scrambling to redo my list.
Well, yeah. I mean, unless maybe I'm the one that's way off. I don't know. I just took it as these were the movies we covered. Who were the best directors? Who were the best actors? Who were the best?
Yeah,
So
I just looked at these are the movies we covered. The people in these movies, who's the best? And
right.
then in
Yeah.
picking them, I'm like, oh yeah, this guy directed a movie on this list, and he also directed a bunch of other great movies. So he's,
Yes. Yeah.
so but if I'm only focusing, if this was the only movies they ever did in their career,
Yeah.
that changes my list. But there's
Yeah.
an easy answer that I'm going to give now, and
Okay.
then when we break, I'll redo the rest of my list. This person
Okay.
was not on my original list, but
Okay.
based on this criteria, I'm going to do the same thing I did with Max von Sydow, William
Yes.
Friedkin.
Oh,
We did two
yes.
movies on the list.
Yes.
Two is better than one. He's number five.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's great. Um, can't argue with that. Um, I actually did not include him on my list, but my number 5 was Martin Scorsese for The King of Comedy.
Mm.
And partly because, you know, I love a lot of his films. I love The King of Comedy. It maybe is a little bit offbeat. It may be not his greatest film, but I think it is a very good movie. And I think he did a very good job with it. So that's maybe why he's down at number 5 and not higher on the list for me.
Yeah. See, he is removed from my list because of the new criteria, and that
Yeah,
this is not one of his better films, and he only made my list because of his body of work. Love the film.
right.
I love all the
Yeah,
films on these lists, but um, no, based on this new criteria, Freakin has taken his place.
yeah,
Um, I'll have to go with another easy one because again, I'm gonna need time to redo my list. So the other person that won't change no matter what the criteria is Andrei Tarkovsky. I think
uh,
objectively speaking, it's the best film of these 20 films is his Solaris. My opinions, well, I guess it's not my opinion because I'm saying objectively. Subjectively would be my opinion. But
Yes.
I think it's the best film on the list, and it's the most artistic film on the list, and it strikes a good balance of art and entertainment. And yeah, Andrei Tarkovsky is number four.
Well, yeah, that's hard to argue with. And again, this was kind of a first time watch for me, so I didn't feel quite as confident. So I did not choose him as one of my top five, but I did think about it because I think it was a very masterful job that he did there. And in some ways, I should have included him. But instead, for my number four, I've gone with somebody who I have a very personal connection with, who I've already talked about, and that is Mel Brooks for Blazing Saddles. Because I think he did a masterful job with that. I think it's hilarious. I think, it's just, to me, it's a perfect film. So he's my number four.
Hmm. All right, so I guess we can squeeze one more in before we run out of time. This is very tricky for me, man. Because again, it's a whole new criteria. Tarkovsky was
Yes.
easy because I felt he was number one. Freakin was easy because he directed two great films on this list, as opposed to one. Um, there is no other no-brainer for me. Everyone else is very debatable on whether they should be top five or not be top five. So for me, I am going to kill time until we run out of time, and I can do this on the other side of this recording. We're out of time. Talk to you in 10 minutes.
Okay. See you then.
All right.
Oh.
Okay. So my list has taken a new shape now. So I already eliminated Martin Scorsese from the list. Uh, I'm also going to have to eliminate John Huston for similar reasons, in that this is far from his best film. It's a great film, but it's far from his best. He didn't have to go through anything tumultuous to get this done. It's a great film, but when I'm not considering his full body of work, there's no particular reason that I should pick him. Sam Peckinpah is going to have to be removed from my list. I think this is Peckinpah's best film, but when I'm looking at it as far as filmmakers go, Sam Peckinpah did a great job with this film. But from all the research I did, the producers also did a great job. The writers also did a great job. Not taking anything away from Peckinpah, but this was a collaborative effort that he was a part of. And since he wasn't the only singular force getting this done, despite being one of my favorite filmmakers, despite being on my list because of his body of work, with the criteria of work only considering these films, he's going to have to be removed from my list. And I think everyone else is going to stay. And then I just added the three new people. William Friedkin was one of the people I added. The other person I'm going to add, which is going to be an easy choice, is Ingmar Bergman. This is a historic film. We can debate, well, was this entertaining? Was this good? Same thing when I picked the movie because it was historic and it changed cinema. You couldn't tell it without it. He was a singular force behind the movie that changed cinema, and you couldn't tell the story of cinema without it. And yeah, for me, it's an easy choice. Um, yeah, I mean, Seven Seal is amazing. So,
So is that your number three?
yes,
Number three. Okay.
yeah.
Well, I agree with you. And spoiler alert, I did include him on my list.
Mhm.
I didn't put him at number three. Who I put at number three is actually Sam Peckinpah for The Wild Bunch. So you eliminated him, but I put
You
him
brought it
there
back.
because I did think this was his greatest film, and I think it is a great film, and I have no complaints about it really. So I thought I had to include him in this. So simple as that, really.
Good enough reason for me, man. Another easy choice. This person was going to be on my list either way. Again, same reason I picked his movie to be on my list. Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa, historic film. Can't tell the history of cinema without it. He was the sole driving force behind the movie. Easy choice.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And again, might be a bit of a spoiler alert here. I did not pick him as my number two. I did include him, but I did pick for my number two Ingmar Bergman for The Seventh Seal. So, for all the reasons you said, I just think it's an incredible work. I think it goes from moments of horror to moments of comedy and joy and everything in between. It just runs the gamut of human emotion, and it never feels wrong. It all feels very cohesive, and I think it is a masterpiece. There's no other way to put it. I think he did a great job. And again, the numbers, in terms of whether he's number two or he's number one, or I haven't really given that a whole lot of thought, but I put him at number two.
Yeah. All right. So for me, this was probably the hardest choice. So my thinking is, again, since we changed the criteria to only these films, is how much of a driving force was this filmmaker to this film? Like, how much was it his sole leadership that got this film done? How much did he have to do to get the film done? How great is the end product as a result of it? Um, and for me, this was a balancing act. And this particular filmmaker, part of him being on the list was more so the journey there, right? Um, Few people I considered with this criteria. I considered Primer. I considered The Brown Bunny. These are independent filmmakers, and these were their magnum opuses. These were the greatest films they've made. They made an imprint on cinema. They really went through it to get these films done. Otto Preminger, to a certain extent. Laura made him an A-lister. So
Yeah.
these were all people I considered. But ultimately, I went with Carl Theodor Dreyer for
Mhm.
Vampire. Um, Again, he didn't make a film, I think, for like 5 or 6 years prior to this. It took him a while to be able to get this film done. I think he did the story of Joan of Arc or something Joan of Arc, um,
Yeah.
a silent film, which was great, but it didn't make money. So it took him a while to be able to get a film done. And then when he got this film done, it took him like another almost 11, 10, 11 years to get another film done. So this film took a lot out of him. And the fact that he spent so much time to get this film done after doing a film that was deemed too artistic, and this is the film he does, even more of an art house film. And it
Yeah.
took him another 11 years to get another film done. It's like, fool me once, fool me twice. Now you're making another film for another decade, man. So just his conviction to just stick to his artistic principles. Um, how can I not admire and reward this guy by putting him number one on my list?
Wow. Well, that's all very good reasoning, and yeah, I can't disagree with you. I think it is a great film, and it's really his direction that makes it a great film. The script itself, I don't know,
I could have
hard to
wrote it in
follow.
like 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another director wouldn't have made a good movie with that script at all,
No.
but he did something great with it. So, yeah, I can totally see why you would include him. I did not include him on my list. Um, I didn't even really think about it. Now that you say it, yeah, maybe I should have thought about it. But I suppose I've already given it away. But I put
Akira
my
Kurosawa.
number one, and I did not pick this film as one of my top five films. But considering just what a brilliant job he did with it, and how influential it is and was, and I just have to say, yeah, he was perhaps the number one director here for creating something just so important, and there was really nothing like it before, but there's been a whole lot of stuff like it since then. He's just influenced so many people. So yeah, I really had to include him as one of the top five directors, and I put him at number one, in fact. So there you go.
Okay. So you have my tweet with a list for you to follow, right?
Yes.
All right, this is pretty much your section. This is the
Okay.
equivalent of the rewind. So
Yes. So I'm going to start back at the very beginning. So,
I think it was like November we started,
yeah. Um,
2022.
yes, that sounds right.
Mhm.
And we started with blaxploitation films.
No, if you look at the list at the bottom, it says number 26. We've done 26 of these shows. So number
Aha.
26 says film noir, and that's when we covered
Oh yeah.
the two
Okay. Yes.
directors, and 25 is
Yes.
blaxploitation. Those were the
Yes.
only, I think that was November and then December, and then after that we're in 2023.
Right. Right. Yes. So the very first episode we did was very off the cuff. We didn't really. I think we kind of had a plan going in, but we didn't really stick to it, and we wound up talking about Orson Welles and Fritz Lang and going through their filmographies, and it was kind of film noirish. We talked about film noir, um, so that was kind of what we did there. And I think, speaking for myself, I wasn't prepared, because I didn't know what we were going to be talking about, so I didn't get to talk about a lot of the films in a way, just the ones that I had happened to see. Um, and I think there's a lot of great films there that we probably could talk about at some point. I still can't do it right now, but I think there's a lot of stuff on both of their lists that would probably be worth looking at more so than we did that day. What do you think?
So first of all, we done a few reviews together where we were doing like
Yes,
public domain films. We would talk about the films and have the guests, watch the full movie and then recap it. And we did that off and on for a bit. And then I think I
yes,
contacted you, say, hey, you want to do this again? And that's when we kind of just did that episode off the cuff. And
yeah,
we found it fun and we decided to do a little bit more structured. I think that episode we talked about blaxploitation and film noir, but most of the conversation stored toward film noir. So after
yes,
that, we said, you know what, next episode, let's just do top 10 blaxploitation.
yes. That's true, and it was in a way. I don't think we planned for the top 10 so much. You kind of told me a couple of days ahead of time that you were going to do this top 10, and you sent me the list. And I had seen most of the films on the list, and there were a couple I hadn't seen before, including The Liberation of L.B. Jones. So I set out to make sure that I saw the films that I hadn't seen, but some of the ones that I hadn't seen in a long time, like Ganja and Hess, for instance. And so this was kind of a new thing, to be going through 10 movies all at once and talking about them. And I kind of realized, yeah, I really should have rewatched all these films really to be able to really get into them. So it was kind of a steep learning curve in the moment. But but yeah, I thought it was great to talk about those films, and some of my favorite films in there in a way. Um, what are your memories of that?
Yeah, so at this point, we were trying to get some structure to what we were doing. The first episode was kind of off the cuff. With this one, I think the list gave us at least some structure to go off of.
Hmm.
And I did not rewatch the films. I went off of memory, honestly, for
Yeah,
these films. Most of them I'd seen multiple times. I'd seen all of them at least once. And just based on my memory, and then I researched them a little bit to refresh me on how I felt about it. And it was just basically deliberating that got me to get a consensus of the top 10. But it wasn't until the next episode when we did slashers that I started rewatching all of the movies on the list.
yeah. Same for me. And there are many other blaxploitation films that we didn't talk about that would probably be fun to talk about as well in the future. And same goes for the slashers. We covered a lot of movies on that slasher episode, but there are a lot of slasher films that I love that we didn't talk about, and so there's many more that I could imagine talking about. And in fact, not that this would have necessarily made a top 10 list, but there was a time when we talked about doing prom night back in the day when we were reviewing movies together early on, and we were going to do prom night, but then a couple of things happened and we never got to prom night. and we didn't talk about it here either. So it feels like a bit of a hole in the filmography or something. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I mean, slasher films. I know horror films are probably my number one genre, and within that, slasher films are perhaps my number one subgenre because they were just so huge when I was young, and I saw so many of these films, so they became a huge part of me. And I could enjoy slasher films even when they're not necessarily the greatest. There's just something about them that I really enjoy. Um, so, perhaps there's more there to be discussed at some point. Um, what do you think?
Yeah, so this was the first time we had done a list like this where we had watched all of the films, or at least for
Hmm.
me, I did. Like I said, for the first list, I didn't. And not only did we do a top 10, but we also highlighted a couple directors. So in all, I ended up watching 15 movies for
Yes.
this podcast. And at this point, I think we're doing them once a month because it was just so much effort to watch these
Yes.
films. And then it was a matter of like, do I need to rewatch them because when are we going to record? And it's been so long since I watched them. What I remember from this episode is watching 13 Women. It's a film I
Yeah.
never even heard of. It's not that it was so spectacular, it's just that it was great finding something that I'd never heard of that was so old that was, when you look at the criteria, a slasher film. And just
Mhm.
discovering that was a lot of fun. And also, it was a lot of fun watching all these slasher films within a short period of time because my two favorite subgenres of films that I can watch and watch them, even if the quality of the films aren't good, I'd still be entertained by them. And that is film noir and as slasher. So I remember it was a lot of fun for me doing that episode.
Yeah, me too, totally. And yeah, unfortunately, I think there were some things that kind of kept getting in the way, and we kept delaying and delaying. So, and by the time we did the episode, it was like, oh man, maybe we need to rewatch these. But yeah, a problem that may have continued somewhat when we moved on to do 1930s gangster films, which similarly we did about 15 films again. Not only did we do a couple of directors as well as the top 10, but we also did the remake of Scarface so we could talk about it in relation to the early Scarface. So definitely a lot of films to be covered there. And that was also great fun. And I don't know if I mean, I'm sure there are films we didn't cover, 1930s gangster films. I don't know if there's any that, I feel really bad that we didn't get to. But there certainly are other gangster films, I think, maybe not from the 30s, that are great movies that would be worth looking at. What do you think? Did we miss anything in the 30s that we should have looked at?
So that was another episode where we did 15 movies in our top 10 list because there
Yes.
were so many ancillary movies to watch. So that
Yes.
took a while, but I love 1930s gangster films. That would probably be number three of
Hmm.
subgenres of films that I like. I like them because they were fast paced, they had a lot of action, and they were made at a time, most of them, where you had the Hollywood system when there wasn't necessarily a third act. The films would
Hmm.
wrap up right after the climax. So they were short, easy to watch, and a lot of these films also had one of my favorite actors of all time, James Cagney, was in a lot of these films we watch, and a lot of those Warner Brothers films were very exciting. So yeah, I remember loving it for that, and also watching a film that I'd only seen once before, Pepe Le Moco, which
Yes.
was a gem, and I was thrilled I was able to revisit that movie because it ended up being one of my favorite movies on that list and one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, and you introduced me to it because I was not familiar with that movie. So I was very pleased to see that movie for the first time, and definitely want to see it again under slightly better circumstances because the copy I was looking at had some issues with the subtitles. But anyway, it was a great movie, and yeah, definitely a very good surprise to discover that. So next, we moved on to basically so bad they're good movies. And this is something very near and dear to my heart because I've spent a lifetime looking for movies that are so bad they're good. my friends and I used to do this all the time. So there are so many of these movies that I love and have seen over the years. I think we managed to pick a very diverse list of films, not all one type. And a lot of them are films that I wouldn't necessarily even think of in that way, like Batman and Robin, which I didn't realize was actually so bad it's good. I knew it was kind of considered bad, but I didn't know it was so bad. Um, so there were some surprises there for me. And also movies like Samurai Cop, which I had never seen before, but I knew Hollywood Cop by the same director, which was one of my favorites from when I was 12 or 13. So, yeah, really enjoyed doing that. And that's, of course, where we also looked at about 5 Ed Wood films and also the movie about Ed Wood. So yeah, it was a lot of movies to look at once again, and I sure enjoyed doing it. And I'm always up for watching more really bad movies, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about the so bad they're good movies?
Yeah, I was a little worried about doing movies that were comedies or movies that you laugh at because those are the hardest to review. Um, but this was my favorite podcast to record because it was so much fun watching those movies. Again, another situation where we did a top 10 list, but because of all the ancillary movies we watched, it ended up being another time we watched 15 movies.
Yeah,
Ironically, doing all these good bad movies, the two best movies we saw were actually just good movies. Best bad movie ever, which was a documentary on Troll 2, and then of
yes.
course Ed Wood, which is a great movie about a bad filmmaker.
Oh, now you've done it.
I've angered the internet again.
Oh no. Oh man.
But yeah, I just loved it because I got to rewatch some of my favorite bad movies, which was just hilarious. And also a movie that I think I may have seen once, but we included it because I think you said we should be diverse. I think it
Yeah.
was you, or one of us said that we should probably try to be as diverse as possible with the
Mhm.
list. And one of the movies that, if we weren't trying to be diverse, would not have been included was Mommy Dearest. And I
Mhm.
laughed out loud several times watching Mommy Dearest by myself in my apartment. And I remember
Yeah.
laughing out loud even while we recorded it. And
Yeah.
the fans, they found similar joy in it too, because it's one of our more popular videos, the review on Mommy
Yeah.
Dearest. And when I re-uploaded this video, once we got the show title officially, because at this point we were just doing episodes as a Seán Weathers podcast, I re-uploaded some of the old episodes under the title No Rules Film School podcast, and this ended up getting more hits than the original video, and the original video got more hits. So
Yeah.
collectively, this is one of our most popular and probably our most successful recording that we did, and it was the most fun as well.
Yeah. I agree. I really enjoyed it, and I would always be up for more. So bad they're good movies. One of my favorite things.
And I think we had to narrow it down too because there were too many. Didn't we narrow it down like
Oh, yeah.
the 20th century or something like that?
Yes, I think we did. Yeah. Um, yeah. Because there were too many, and we just couldn't cut it down. I
Yeah, we
totally
cut it
agree.
down so we didn't have any
Yeah.
like modern films. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing after 2000. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
think something like that.
yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
we
yeah,
can
that
always
was,
revisit it with,
oh, yeah.
you know, newer
Yeah.
stuff.
Absolutely. And many older ones that we missed as well. But, so after that, we were trying to figure out what else can we do that's kind of different and interesting. And we wound up with the haunted house horror films, which was a very interesting choice. I don't think of that as often as, say, slasher films or zombie films, haunted house films. But yeah, there are a lot of haunted house films and a lot of great haunted house films. And we managed to do quite a few. But again, we didn't do all of the films that I love that are haunted house films. Movies like The Legend of Hell House, The Changeling, many others, that I think are also great movies that we just couldn't include. But I had a good time with that one as well, and I think we saw quite a few really good movies that time. What did you think?
Yeah, this was a unique opportunity where I got to see one of my favorite movies ever made, and you got to see one of your favorite movies ever made in this list. And for me,
Yes.
that was a Shining. For you, that was Paranormal Activity. So, um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but this was a fun recording because again, I got to watch The Shining again. It's one of my favorite movies that I can rewatch a lot. There's some of my favorite movies, like my favorite movie of all time is 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it's not a movie I can watch very often because as much as I love it, because I think it's a perfect movie, it's a tough watch. The Shining is one of those movies, it's one of my favorite movies. It's also a very easy watch. So it was fun to rewatch that. Also, rewatching a movie like Poltergeist is a movie I never saw too often, but when I saw it again, I was like, man, this is a perfect movie. There's like nothing wrong with this movie at all. And it's a movie that you can watch with your family. It's a movie you can watch by yourself. And it's a movie that has so many great beats down to the very last scene of the movie had me laughing out loud. So
Yeah,
there were a lot of great movies on this list. So it was a lot of fun to watch that. We got to watch a few movies again that I would never have watched, like House. Even though I didn't like it was interesting to see something a little bit more diverse. It's outside of my wheelhouse. A
mhm.
movie, pun intended, a movie that I'd heard a lot about, but I just never watched. And you always have those type of films that you always either intend to watch or hear about. You never end up
Yeah,
finding a reason to watch it. So I found a reason to watch it, even though I didn't personally like it. It was fun to just see it and just get it off my bucket list. So this was also going to end up being our last list episode, and we also decided that we would stop doing the ancillary films. So this
mhm.
was this was also just 10 instead of the 15 we had previously done, like at least
Yes,
3 times in a row. But yeah, this
yes,
was the last list episode. It was a fun way to go out, and a movie that seriously, I mean, obviously I tease you with Paranormal Activity, but one of your favorite movies, The Amityville Horror, I was very
yes.
hesitant to put it on the list, but I'm glad we did because that was a movie that exceeded my expectations. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, you like to make fun of me on Paranormal Activity, but this does feature one of my favorites, and that is the Amityville Horror. And it's a movie that some people don't like, and some people prefer Amityville 2, and they think it's the better film. But for me, Amityville Horror, it's just been one of my favorites since I was 10 years old. So yeah, I love it, and I can't see it enough. So yeah, I really enjoyed talking about it, watching it again, and I enjoyed watching all of them, and talking about them. And yes, this was our last top 10. And we were thinking about doing a top 10, or at least, well, I guess a top 10. We were going to focus on Betty Davis and do 10 Betty Davis films. But then we suddenly thought, it took us like 2.5 months to get around to recording this thing. Maybe if we just did one movie a week, we would be just as far ahead. We'd have 10 movies done in the same amount of time as it took us to do 10 movies this way. So we thought, let's pick one Betty Davis film, and we settled on All About Eve, which we've already talked about, what a great movie that is tonight. And I thought that was a brilliant start to just focusing on one film. What did you think?
Yeah, we were trying to think of what's the theme going to be for our next top 10 list. And I think
Yeah.
I'd said, let's go with actors. And I was like, if we're going to go to actors, we want to pick actors that not just are good actors, but have 10 quality films that are worth watching. And then I
Hmm.
think I had narrowed it down. I said, what do you think about Betty Davis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Jack Nicholson? It's not that these are the greatest actors of all times, but these are actors that happen to be in a lot of great films. You
Hmm.
can have great actors like Daniel Day-Lewis, but he may not have even made 10 films in his career, you know?
Yeah.
So these are
Yeah.
actors that were in a lot of movies that were entertaining, and they were in enough movies that we can pick and choose and decide which one we wanted. And I think maybe you had said let's go with Betty Davis. And then
I
while we
think
were
so.
picking
Yeah.
Betty Davis movies, I think you had said, maybe one of us had said, why don't we just focus on one? And that completely changed the format of the show moving forward.
Yes. Yes, I think you said that, and then we had a hard time deciding which movie it would be, and some of the ones we were considering were the later ones, which I love, like Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, and that kind of thing. But we also talked about some of the earlier ones, and somehow we zeroed in on All About Eve. which was kind of right in the middle. And I'm glad we did, because that was a real eye opener for me to see that again after all those years.
And it's
So
still one of our more popular shows as well.
yeah, yeah. So that I think we made the right choice there. And then the next one we did was The Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah, which we also talked about tonight as one of the great movies, and certainly a very, very thoroughly enjoyable experience watching and talking about that one too. What did you think?
Yeah, fun movie to talk about. Again, another popular show as far as hits go online and comments go. People, loved our coverage of it, and it was fun watching it. And it was when you revisit these movies, as we get through this list, there's some movies that you rewatch them and they're kind of disappointing. Some movies are, kind of what you thought. This was one of the movies where I was just laughing and smiling ear to ear as I watched it
Hmm.
because it was so much better than I imagined, and I remembered it being great anyway.
Yeah, and it made us think we got to do more Peckinpah, which we are going to be doing very soon, in fact. So that's great. And the next one we did was King of Comedy, Martin Scorsese, with a brilliant performance by Robert De Niro, which we talked about tonight as well. Um, and some people might think an offbeat choice for Martin Scorsese. They might think, why didn't you do Taxi Driver, or why didn't you do Goodfellas or something like that? But there is something about the King of Comedy that I find irresistible. I can watch it anytime, and I really enjoyed watching it and talking about it on the show. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I wasn't too excited to do this movie. I think we ended up watching it because I wanted to do the Joker, but you said you hadn't seen the Joker. And
Yeah.
I think at this point we were saying we should only do films that we both think is great going into
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to figure out like where we're going with the show and how we're going to do with it. And we agreed like we should only do great movies. And our approach should be like, let's talk about great movies that maybe younger viewers haven't seen and kind of introduce them to it. And and I was thinking, man, the Joker is kind of like a new contemporary great movie. You weren't so sure. I brought up the fact that the King of Comedy was something that the Joker borrowed heavily from. They even had Robert De
Mhm.
Niro in the film. And then I think you more were pushing for it more so than I was. I wasn't too enthused to do it because it was a lesser Scorsese movie. And I remember just watching it once, maybe, and not thinking it was that great. Um, I don't think it's one of the better movies we've seen, but it was better than what I thought it was going to be. It was really entertaining and it exceeded my expectations because I think my expectations were too low for the movie. It was a very good movie.
Yeah, it is. And next, we went to The Seventh Seal, which we talked about tonight as one of the great movies that we've watched on this show. So, um, what can we say beyond that? It was great. And perhaps we need to look at more Ingmar Bergman in the future as well. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it was a little bit disappointing just because my memory of it was probably being like a top five movie for me. After watching it, it's maybe like top 20 or so, maybe top 10 if I really thought about it. Still, one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, historically important, fun watch, glad to rewatch it.
Yeah. So then we went to A Woman Under the Influence, which is a movie that I had been wanting to see for a long time. And I think you thought you had seen it already. And, I think we were both a little bit surprised by what we wound up seeing. Wasn't quite what we imagined. Is that right? Did you think you saw it? And then,
Yeah, I thought it was a movie I saw before. I wasn't 100% sure because I know I'd seen a few of his movies and I'd given up on some point on watching his movies because they were a little too tough to watch. But there were a couple of his movies that I saw, and because of the way his movies played out, it was a similar cast. The locations were all kind of similar. It was just like on streets or in apartments or in houses. Visually and cast-wise, there wasn't a lot to distinguish one movie from another. It's the same people, similar situations, relationships, and inner city. So it was tough to know if I had seen it before. I found it a little bit long. I feel it didn't age particularly well. I was glad we watched it because it was historically important, but it's one of those films that was kind of disappointing because it was way too long. And I said the time hasn't done it justice. But again, historically great, influential filmmaker, and it was good to at least check it off the bucket list.
Yeah, and some people do list it as one of their top 10 films of all time. They really love this film.
Not me.
No, not me either. And I've preferred a couple of his other films. So yeah, that one was a little bit of a surprise. Still great performances, and really, interesting,
Unique performances.
unique performances. Um,
I'm
and
angering so many people right now. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
At
Um,
this point, I'm almost trolling the audience. I'm sorry.
yeah. Well, in any case, we'll move on. And the next one we watched was Laura, a movie that apparently we angered our audience with as well.
I
So,
think the video that got the most hate that we've ever posted, where I think the title was like Almost Classic, or the I think no, it's the One Flaw in Laura. So
yeah,
many people. This film is perfect. What are you talking about? It's flawless. How dare you? Who do you think you
yeah,
are? And
yeah,
the graphic had 4.5 stars. And in
yes,
the review itself, all we did was praise it. And I just
yeah,
pointed out, well, if they could have tweaked this a little bit differently, it'd be perfect. And it
yeah,
was just so much venom and bile
yeah.
from
Oh
the
yeah.
internet.
Yes, well, and it is a movie I love, and I've seen it many times. But yeah, that's interesting how you make one comment and suddenly you're a hater, I guess. But still glad we did it. It was great to see it, great to talk about it. And from there, we went to one of my all-time favorites, Blazing Saddles, a movie I love, and I loved watching it again. Loved talking about it. Um, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about Mel Brooks and Blazing Saddles, but what do you think? Any thoughts on it?
So this was a movie where coming into it, I hated the ending. And I
Mm,
think I may have told you that before we watched it. But I just did not like the ending. Because I had seen it several times already. I hadn't seen it any time recently. But in the context of the last time I saw it, I thought the ending was great. It fit the movie. It was perfect. I loved it. And it was one of those movies that exceeded my expectations of it.
yeah, and that's interesting. I don't think you told me ahead of time. You told me after, but I've always loved the ending. That's one of the things that always really worked for me. So that's interesting to hear that perspective on it. But glad you liked it this time.
Loved it.
Um, yeah. So anyway, I can watch Blazing Saddles anytime. So enough said about that. From there,
The
we
new
went to
sheriff is a Nick.
yes. There's so many great lines and great moments. Oh man. Um, the next one we did was My Brother's Wife, Doris Wishman. And I suppose this, in a way, was more about a tribute to Doris Wishman and her career, in a way, as opposed to just focusing on.
More so as
on
in more so in a way, as in every way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not that we thought this movie was on its own a brilliant movie, but it's representative of Doris Wishman and her career, I think, and we both have a soft spot for Doris Wishman, and perhaps you even more than me. You feel like she's influenced you in your work the same way Mel Brooks influenced me, perhaps.
Yes, she's been a huge influence on me. I told the story when we did the podcast. One of the films I did, I used the plot from My Brother's Wife for the movie, which is why I wanted to specifically highlight My Brother's Wife from her filmography. And boy, what a stinker. It started off as a ball of wax. This guy is like puffing and puffing down the street. He's determined to get somewhere.
yeah,
Like, it's like, yes, here we go. Like 30 seconds
yeah,
later, it's like, oh
yeah,
my God, how much longer do we have?
yeah. Well, there is something totally charming about it, though, in its own way, and you know, I just have a soft spot for those kind of movies, even when they're, pretty much bad. I don't know what it is. I just love them. So I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad we talked about Doris Wishman. And, I don't know if we'll cover another Doris Wishman film.
Ooh.
But I think there are some other filmmakers, perhaps, that are in the same category that we might cover.
As a
Perhaps
tribute, yes.
Al Adamson, we've talked about, for instance.
We've been talking about him for a while. We need to get into
Yeah,
him at some
yeah.
point.
So that's
It'll
something that
probably
I,
be a similar thing where it's more about paying tribute and talking about Adamson for most of the movie, but then
yes.
obviously we're not going to focus on, we're not doing a top 10 list or anything like that. So
No,
we'll have to
no.
end up picking one movie to focus on. So
Yeah, for sure. So after that, we went to, from a terrible movie in some ways, we went to a great movie, a brilliant movie, Solaris. Um, and yeah, that was my first time. I had thought I had seen it at some point, but no, I was getting it confused with something else. I had never seen it. And yeah, it blew me away. I thought it was a masterpiece. I thought it was amazing. And it definitely makes me want to watch more of Tarkovsky's work, and I'm sure we will. And you consider yourself a big fan of Tarkovsky, right?
yes, this is interesting. We went from probably the worst film we've ever spotlighted to maybe the best film we've ever spotlighted. And
Yeah.
again, the film did really well online. We got a lot of support, a lot of people that liked the film. This was a film that I first heard of it when I was doing a casting call in the Performing Arts Library in Manhattan a very long time ago with a friend of mine. And there was this an intellectual, some kind of professor, mathematician or whatever, and he saw we were casting movie stuff. He was in the performing arts stuff, and he got into a discussion with my colleague, my partner, who was producing the film with me. I was more so focused when these people are going to show up. Where are they? Because we were using it as a free space to cast, and he got into a conversation with the guy, and the guy brought up Solaris as a movie. And he was saying, yeah, these are the type of movies intellectuals watch, whatever. So that was kind of my first introduction to Tarkovsky and his films, was just that brief kind of interaction and me kind of hearing about it secondhand. And I can see why, because even the people that reply online, they have these well thought out, almost thesis like comments on the movie and how they dissect it and talk about it. So it's definitely a different audience that would reply to that than an audience that reply, "What you talking about, man? Ed was a great filmmaker. What have you ever done?" So definitely a different type of audience. So
Yes.
yeah, this was a movie I'd seen once before and I loved it. And it exceeded my expectations. It was better than I remembered it. I remember there were long sequences that kind of lost my attention the first time I saw it. And in the second time I saw it, I'm like, oh man, this scene's pretty good, but I remember it being too long. And then suddenly the scene is over. I'm like, oh, I thought we would have been driving in this car to Tokyo for like 30 minutes, but it ended up finishing up like quicker than I thought. It is a
Yeah.
slow-paced movie, but my expectations was that it was even slower than I thought. So
Yeah.
when it wasn't, it kind of relieved me in that, like, yeah, this is a pace I can deal with.
Yeah. And it feels slow at first, but then the more you get into it, the more it doesn't feel slow, even though it's quite long. It really does absorb you, and you really want to know what's going to happen. So it's really a great movie. So from one psychological science fiction film, we moved on to another one, albeit a very different one, called Primer, which was much more low budget, independent. I had actually never heard of it until you told me about it, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was a very interesting movie, although very difficult to understand a lot of what was going on, but deliberately so. Kind of wanted it to be full of all the real jargon and everything. So, very good, very interesting. Any thoughts about it at this point?
Yeah, it's one of our least popular videos. Didn't really get us a lot of traffic, but it was, as far as a viewership standpoint, it was interesting to dissect it. I had seen it before, unlike you, but it's always good to be diverse in the type of films we cover. And even though it's not going to be in the pantheon of these other films, it's good to check out good independent work. And this was really great independent work.
Yeah, totally, totally. Um, from there, we went on to one of the great films, which we have already talked about tonight quite a bit, and that is Rashomon. And when we were first talking about doing a Kurosawa film, I had imagined maybe we would do something like The Seven Samurai, but then we kind of decided let's do Rashomon because it's fairly short, and we needed something short. But it turns out, oh, it's also a brilliant movie and something that we definitely needed to cover at some point. So I'm glad we chose to do Rashomon, a movie that I feel like I had seen, even though I never had, because it's just so much. It's been copied so much by TV shows, other movies. But good to really get to know the original and dissect it. Um, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what happened is Laura took not Laura, A Woman Under the Influence. It really messed us up. It was long and it was tough to watch. It really
Yes.
messed with us psychologically. And I think after that, we were like, you know what? We can't do this every week. It's just too much. It's too
Yes.
much mentally and it's just too much physically to go through a movie like that on a weekly basis. So we're like, you know what? Let's alternate. Let's do something like that and then something easy. So we did that. Then we did Laura. I think I mentioned I don't think I'd ever seen Laura before. So that was like it wasn't too
Yes.
bad. And then we went with a comedy. So it was like even easier. And then we went with, Doris Wishman, even easier. So it was like, all right, now we're ready for something harder like Solaris. And now
Yeah.
let's take a step back with something simpler like Primer, a nice independent film. So we're doing the back and forth thing. Um,
Yes.
with that stuff. So um, yeah, and then Rashomon was where we got back to doing something a little bit harder. But yeah, I mean it's a great movie. But that whole back and forth thing, I just wanted to touch base on that real quickly. That kind of started
Yes.
with
Yes.
A Woman Under the Influence. So,
You're
but yeah,
right.
Rashomon, great film. Um, we were mentally prepared.
Yeah. We were
Physically
indeed. Yes.
prepared. But yeah,
Yes.
great film.
Yeah.
Oh,
Totally.
I'm sorry. The reason I brought it up. Okay. I brought it up because, again, I'm sorry, I lost track. Women Under the Influence. I'm sorry. Bringing it up gave me PTSD and I lost where I was. That's what it was. I got PTSD. The
Uh-huh.
reason I brought up
Yes.
the Women Under the Influence is because even though we were going back and forth, we were like, listen, when we do these harder movies, let's try to ease ourselves into it. And I remember
Yes.
you said you hadn't seen Kurosawa. I was like, man, that's so disappointing because I love Kurosawa. And I was like, you know what? If we're gonna do Kurosawa, this is the most accessible film. One,
Yes.
because it's the shortest, it's the easiest to dissect because it's just one short story being told like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And also, if you needed, it was also dubbed. So it was short,
Yes.
it was a simple story, just repetitive over. It was dubbed if you needed to not read subtitles. It was easily accessible. And we were just like, if we're going to do Kurosawa, let's do the one that's like, the quickest we can get into and that wouldn't exhaust us too much. So that's why we specifically picked that Kurosawa. I'm sorry. When I brought up one of them, I
Yes.
just got PTSD and I
Yeah.
lost track of where it was.
Yes. Well, I think possibly also Primer, while it's a short movie, it's very dense. There's a lot of dense information in there. So it didn't feel like it was a really relaxing break. So I think we didn't want to go into anything that was going to be too challenging after that. So Rashomon was perfect. And from there, we went on to something that, in its own way, is a little bit challenging, which is The Brown Bunny, which is a movie that I had seen before. And like a lot of people, I had kind of dismissed it as being just boring and weird. I didn't get it. And when you brought it up, I was like, oh man, I don't know. And I knew I had a copy floating around. And I thought, well, maybe I'll take a look at the first 10 minutes and see, is this something I want to sit through again? And I actually wound up watching about the first 20 minutes and I was like, wow, this is actually really interesting. This is a much more interesting movie than I remembered it. So I said, yeah, we can definitely do this movie. So I'm really glad that we did because I kind of dismissed it after the first viewing and I had no intention of rewatching it. And thanks to you, I, I've rediscovered this movie now and I appreciate it way more than I did before. So That was really worthwhile for me. Do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, so this was a movie I was pushing for us to do, and I knew it was a hate it or love it movie. There's not a lot in between. Even if you go online, people are like, I love it. This is the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. So I knew you would probably go one way or the other. And I knew I was pushing you, so I think we had some films on reserve. We're like, all right, if this doesn't work out, we'll just do this film because we can get into this kind of quick. I think it was maybe like Fury or
Seven or
something
seven? Or,
or
yeah,
Seven.
Fury,
Yeah,
Seven.
there
Yeah,
were a couple of films we
yeah,
had on standby, and then I got
yeah,
the text from you. Is like, yeah, I can do this. So I was kind
yeah.
of happy when I got that text because I was like, he's either gonna hate me or he's gonna love me. So
Yes.
yeah.
So that was definitely one that exceeded my expectations in every way, even though I'd seen it before. And yeah, I appreciate it now much more than I ever would have. So, an important episode for me, if no one else. And from there, we went to Vampire, which you could also say is a bit challenging in its own way, but it's also nice and short. But challenging in terms of following a story, but really very, very interesting to watch. Very, very beautiful visuals, very interesting visuals, and again, a movie that I didn't really know whether I was going to like it or not, but it kind of exceeded my expectations on the visual front, and I found it kind of delightful just to sit and watch it. Um, Thoughts?
Yeah, part of that PTSD from Woman Under the Influence was me going online and doing a Google search for best films under 90 minutes. And I'd come up with a long list, and Vampire was on that list.
Yeah.
And we kept going through the list and thinking about when we are going to get to some of these movies. And then I think this was around October time, and we were
Yes.
getting into horror movies. And I remember this was one of the horror movies on that list. I'm like, listen, it's mainly silent, it's short. Let's give it a shot. And then we can,
Yeah.
it'll give us a chance to get to one of the artsy movies on our list and also get to a horror movie, and we can mix it up. We can bounce around and do some unconventional horror movies as well. Because we'd obviously done some conventional horror movies with slashers and haunted house. So this gave us something a little bit different to do. I didn't realize it was called Theodore Dry that directed this at the time we
Mhm.
picked it. And I was like, oh, this guy did Passion of Joan of Arc. And it ended up being a nice surprise because the
Yeah.
reasons we picked it wasn't because we thought it was great. We thought it was just like a really short horror film that the critics seemed to like. And it turned out that I ended up liking it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And again, I thought I might have seen it years ago, but I don't know that I did. It was fairly new to me. It wasn't one of the sort of standard silent horror films that I remember seeing. So good to add it to the collection, so to speak. It's definitely a movie worth watching and worth watching again, I would say. And so that was the beginning of our October horror film month. And from there, we went to The Descent, the British horror film. And, a movie that I think we had both enjoyed quite a bit originally when it came out, and we're excited to revisit. And, I still found it enjoyable. I think that perhaps we both found it to maybe not quite be as exciting or interesting as we had thought originally, but still very good horror film, scary, lots of good stuff in it, and glad to have revisited it. Um, yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is a fun movie. I liked it a lot, and I don't want to say anything negative about it because I did enjoy the movie and I do think it's very good. It's just that with my schedule being a manager and trying to do have all these other projects and all these different things I'm doing, finding time for this podcast, it eats into a lot of my free time. So it ends up being a situation where I love movies and I may only end up watching one movie a week. And for a lover of film, with my schedule only being able to watch one movie a week, where my preference would be to watch at least a movie a day, having something like this be the one movie I watch for the week is kind of disappointing. that we covered it because it's like this is going to be the only movie I watch all week, and we're going to have to spend all this time talking about it, researching it. I'm gonna have to spend all this time putting these videos and thumbnails together. It's not that you know, I'm disappointed that I did it. It's just that if you're going to do all this effort, you kind of want it to be maybe of a higher quality. So I'm not sure if a movie on this level is something that I'd be too enthused about doing again, um, because of all the things I just said. But overall, it's a decent, fun movie.
Yeah, I enjoy it, but yeah, it's perhaps not as good as the next one that we did, which is one of the all-time great horror films, perhaps one of the all-time great films, and that is The Exorcist, 1973, which I think is a masterpiece, and I love it. I love everything about it, and yeah, it was great to see it again and talk about it. And I think you can kind of see the difference there. And I often say this, that a lot of modern films, they may say that, hey, this is this generation's version of The Exorcist, but I have yet to see a movie that is really worthy of that title. I don't know. I think The Exorcist still stands as a really groundbreaking and really excellent horror film. Um, Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like it as much as you do, but that's only because you love it so much. But you're right, this was a huge step up from what we previously did. It's an all-time great movie, and it introduced me to William Friedkin, despite the fact that I'd seen this film multiple times. I never really thought about who directed it or cared. And so I love this movie more so for introducing me to Friedkin than just solely the movie alone.
Fair enough. And from there, we went to a movie. I guess we were now entering Noirvember, and we were going to do four noirs, but it didn't work out that way. We ran into some trouble, and anyway, this was the first one we did, which was The Asphalt Jungle by John Huston, one of the great directors of all time, and perhaps one of the great directors of noir. And this is a very good movie, which I think we both felt that we had seen before, but upon watching it, we're not totally sure. I feel like I saw part of it for sure, but I'm not sure I saw it all, and you're not sure maybe if you saw it ever. So, and perhaps we kind of both felt that it wasn't quite as good as his best films, like Treasure of the Sierra Madre or The Maltese Falcon, but it's still a very good movie, and it has a lot going for it. And I was certainly glad to see it, especially because I thought I had seen it, but it was basically new to me and very interesting. Lots of interesting stuff in it, and I think very influential as well in terms of the heist subgenre. Yeah, anything you want to say about that?
Sure. So when we originally did our list of best directors, I was thinking more so who are the best directors on this list and include all their body of work. And when I did that,
Yes.
John Huston didn't make my list because John Huston is one of my favorite directors of all time. And I think words matter. So you saying that, oh, this maybe not be the best John Huston film we ever watch, that's only because he's made some of the greatest films ever made. So I don't want
Yes.
viewers to get the wrong impression. This is one of my favorite noirs I've ever seen. Part of it is because I hadn't seen it before. I thought I did. So it's kind of like imagine like watching all of these great films and then like all these years later you see a film that's just as good as those films but it's new to you, so you kind of almost like it more because yeah, it's just as good as some of the best noirs I've ever seen, and it's the added fact that it's fresh to me. It's almost like it came out this year because I'd never seen it before. So I loved it. I loved the movie. I thought it had a lot of the typical things you look for in a John Huston film. You know, these characters going on a quest and it being more so about, other things than the actual tangible thing they're looking for, looking for a part of their souls almost. Yeah, this was an amazing film. And you're right. Is it the Sierra Madre? Is it Maltese Falcon? No. Is it one of the best films I've ever seen? Is it one of the greatest noirs? Yes.
Yes, and I should probably add that movies like Maltese Falcon and Treasure of Sierra Madre I've seen multiple times, starting when I was quite young. So if I see this movie again and again, it may get to the point where I say, "Oh my God, this movie is as good as the others." It's possible, It's hard to say after just one viewing, but yes, it is a very good movie, and I liked it. And such is the case with the next one we looked at for Noirvember, which is Out of the Past. Another very great noir, which is well loved. A lot of people cite it as one of the best noirs ever. I didn't know it as well as some of the others. I'd seen it once years ago. Um, and so, yeah, it was great to see it. And yeah, it's a very good movie. Love the cast. Great to get to know it better now after all these years. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so this ended our best 3 weeks stretch in that a good video based on the views I get from my channel for the videos we do together. If it gets to 100 views, it's pretty good. Based on for us. I mean, if someone gets 100 views in a minute, they may be like, "Man, my video is really slow. What's going on?" But based on
Yes.
where we are, 100 videos, 100 views is pretty good. But this was a 3 week stretch where these three movies, back to back to back, Exorcist, Jungle, and Past, several of the videos that I break these podcasts into had over 1,000 views. I think
Yeah.
one of them had over 2,000 views. So this was a really strong and our best 3 week stretch where we just got a lot of views and a lot of engagement of people who started following the channel and became fans of ours. So this was a strong 3 week stretch, and I can see why. All three of these movies were really good. And Out of the Past is similar to Asphalt Jungle. It's a great noir that sprung up my list. Unlike the Asphalt Jungle, which I thought I saw, but I didn't see. I do remember seeing Out of the Past, but I just didn't appreciate it. And on this viewing, it might be one of my favorites, if not my favorite noir, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And with all those views, how many people called us boneheads? Do you remember?
Bozos, get it
Bozos.
right. Get it right, Bozo.
See, I can't even do that. Yeah. So,
No, I don't think we got it. I don't really think we got any negative comments
yeah.
because we praised those movies so much. We
Yeah.
didn't say anything negative.
Yeah. So those really were good weeks, good 3 weeks there.
And
Good.
yeah, we pretty much like I knew a lot about The Exorcist, and yeah, I don't think any of our research was contradicted. The main
No,
thing was that uh, Tyranny, Gene Tyranny,
tyranny. Yeah.
the Tyranny fan base didn't like us. The Laura fan base didn't like us, and the Ed Wood fan base, who knew there was an Ed
Yeah.
Wood fan base that took themselves seriously? I mean, really.
Yes. Wow. Yeah.
No, but no
It's
hate messages from this. A lot of positive, good interaction with the fans.
well, that's wonderful. Um, and so from there, we decided to do another horror film. And this one is a more recent horror film. It's called The Black Phone from 2021. This is a movie that a lot of people told me, "Oh, you've got to see this. This is a great movie. You're going to love this movie." And so I actually picked up a copy, bought a copy during, I guess it was a Black Friday sale or something. And yeah, I was excited to see it. And I think it's a good movie. It's a good horror film. It reminded me a lot of Stephen King, and it's written by his son, so no surprise there, Joe Hill. But yeah, overall, I didn't think it was. Again, I didn't think it was a great horror film like The Exorcist, but it was certainly a good horror film. It was entertaining, and yeah, I don't know whether it would really ever make my top 10 list of anything, but it's. I'm glad to have finally seen it. Um, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I was the one pushing for us to do something a little bit more contemporary, um, just to get some younger viewers in, because that was the whole point of this, is to introduce younger viewers to older movies. But we were just
Yeah,
getting the older audience who saw these movies when they were younger. So I thought it was just important to get a film that was made in the last couple of years. And I'd seen the Black Phone personally, just because I heard about it, it looked like fun, and I enjoyed it. Um, and then when you said you hadn't seen it and you wanted to go to do it, the more excited you got, the more apprehensive I got. I'm like, yeah, I enjoyed it, but do I want to dissect this for a whole episode, you know? Because as much
Yeah.
as I enjoyed it for personal use, again, to me, this is even a notch below The Descent, in
Mhm.
that I don't think it was worth analysis. And, we didn't really get that many views from it anyway, either.
Mhm.
So would I do something like this again? No, but I'm happy that we got something more contemporary in there and we're able to stick to the October theme for horror movies. But I don't think this is of the quality that warrants the level of breakdown and research and time that we put into these movies to get these videos up.
Yeah.
Especially
It's
because, I mean, for a typical Hollywood movie, they didn't put that much effort into it either. I mean, once the setup is done, they spent basically 90% of the movie on a sound stage in a basement. So
yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
it's not like 100% effort was put into this movie either.
Yeah. It's well done, but it feels like it's missing something that would elevate it to being a great horror film. It's
Mhm.
just missing something.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's again,
but
it's good,
it's
it's fun,
yeah.
and but it's clearly just part of it's a factory movie. They're just churning it
Yeah.
out. It's
Yeah.
like let's just get this film done quickly. We're gonna shoot all of it in this basement. Fuck it, we'll figure out a way that we just get the kid in the basement and we'll just do the entire film here, type
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And there may be a sequel coming. So who
yeah,
knows?
it made money. Why
Yes.
not?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what these films are all about, man. It's
Exactly. Yeah.
Blumhouse, man. They just
Yeah.
churn them out.
That's right. So from there, we decided to revisit William Friedkin, and we took a look at The French Connection, the movie he made before The Exorcist, which is also considered to be one of his greatest films and a very good movie. And I had seen it a couple times before, and I really liked it, and definitely enjoyed watching it again. Was a little surprised at how simple it is in a way. The story is very simple. There's not a lot of complexity there. There's not a lot of different characters being developed, and it's almost like a chase that gets broken up with some following people scenes. Chasing, following, chasing, following. It's and it is intense. Once it gets going, and one of the greatest chase scenes of all time. So a great movie for a lot of reasons. Um, but yeah, perhaps not quite as complicated as I had thought it was going to be, even from my memory. Um, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it has to be the greatest chase scene of all time. Once you bring in the real life elements to it, it's like,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we've seen so many great directors, and Friedkin is the one guy we've revisited of all of
yes,
them. I mean, I think it was easier for us to revisit Friedkin than Kurosawa or Tarkovsky because he really only had the two standout movies. So it's not necessarily overwhelming as to say, oh man, which of these films am I going to get into next? It was a pretty
yeah,
obvious choice. If we revisited Friedkin, the movie to go to was naturally The French Connection. So
yeah,
I already said before when we talked about The Exorcist, what a big fan I am of his. And this style of filmmaking, guerrilla filmmaking, shooting on the streets of New York, all of this is things I've done before. It's right down my alley. I love it. I love the movie. But I mean, I do have to admit there's a lot lacking with the story. Like you said, it's kind of repetitive. So there are some faults to the movie, some things that haven't aged well. Some of the things that made it great are kind of like Woman Under the Influence, where it's just like pioneering filmmaking. But then once other people started making films like that, what made you special is no longer special anymore. So I
yeah,
think time takes away from pioneers as opposed to innovators. So yeah, you did it first, but once everyone else is doing it, then there's the only thing special about you is doing it first. I can see that being done by filmmakers like me. I can, I'll go and shoot in the streets of New York,
Yeah, yeah,
I'll do scenes with ad-libbing and people running in subways and letting like pedestrians who don't know when they're in a movie, so
yes,
but
yes,
again, I'm a fan of the filmmaker, and it was good. Not as good as I hoped, but really good.
yeah, for sure. And then we finished off our year with our Christmas movie, having done some polls to try to figure out which Christmas movie we should take a look at. And the results came in, and it was Die Hard, which is definitely a modern classic, which I've seen many times over the years, and I think a lot of people have seen many times over the years. And it's a great action movie. It's a great movie. It's well put together. It's masterfully put together, almost to a point of being too well put together. It's so well done, and all the pieces fit, and it's just perfect. And it's brilliant action sequences, sense of humor. It's really everything you could want in an action film, and it still works. It's still entertaining after all these years. Um, Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, going back at it, we probably should have went with the movie that our YouTube um, subscribers voted for, which was Meet Me in St. Louis. But I think we both wanted to do either Die Hard or Home Alone because those are the ones
Yeah,
that I generally like more associate with like a film that I'd watch at Christmas time.
yeah,
But I kind of put this in the category of like a poltergeist, even though we didn't, do poltergeist as part of one of our only movie we're doing per show. It's kind of like one of those films. Is it great in the sense, am I going to put it up there with one of the greatest movies I've ever seen? No. But is this as entertaining a movie as you can possibly make for this genre? Yeah. It's kind of like what Poltergeist is to horror movies. I can't complain about anything. Every part of this movie comes together perfectly. It's entertaining from the first to the last scene. There's no bad scenes to complain about. I mean, it's not achieving anything great in cinematic history, but it's a movie you can just pop in and watch at any time. And Christmas time is a perfect year for that. And it was extremely entertaining, and a lot of fun.
yeah, totally. And you can watch it over and over again. It never seems to get old. So it's a great movie in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that is our 2023. Interesting
Yes.
year. A lot of interesting movies we watched. Um, I guess next we're just gonna have to focus on 2024, and we're gonna revisit our second filmmaker with Sam Peckinpah with Straw Dogs. Another fun movie dealing with masculinity and some interesting elements like that, and one of my favorite filmmakers as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I've seen that movie, but not for a long, long time. So I'm very interested to see what I'll think of it now.
Yeah. And we have a lot of movies queued up that we're looking to watch. Any that come off the top of your head that you're excited to get to at some point in 2024?
I'm excited to take a look at Sunset Boulevard, which I
Yeah.
think is a great, great movie. And I know we keep talking about Fury. We've almost done it a couple of times, and I think we will at some point, I'm sure. And I look forward to that as well. Um, yeah, I think, gee, off the top of my head, those are the ones that stick out right now. What about you? Are there certain ones you're
Yeah, I
looking
mean, there's
forward
some
to?
movies that I haven't seen at all, that it'd be nice to check out. Um, and there's like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'd love to do
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I'd like to get into more Kurosawa, more Tarkovsky, Kubrick.
Yes.
I mean, we've covered The Shining as part of like a list, but there's so many great Kubrick films. He's my favorite filmmaker. More Orson Welles. We
Yeah.
talked about Orson Welles more than we did his movies. Um, some modern filmmakers like David Fincher, the Coen
Yes.
brothers, um, films like There Will Be Blood, some modern day classics like that I'd like to check out. More foreign movies. I don't think we've done enough
Yeah,
foreign movies. More film noirs. I mean, if
yeah,
we go by what our audience like, they like film noirs, and I think that's an easy way to appease a lot of my subscribers because I
yeah,
got a lot of my subscribers around the time when I was posting a lot of older movies, and
yeah,
so I have a lot of older people that are subscribed, and they'll see my films pop up in their feed. You know, what the hell is this? Let me unsubscribe. but uh, but
yes,
I think there are a lot of people that are still subscribed that would love to see us do more film noirs and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm open to doing anything. I mean,
yeah,
even in recent polls, there's Avengers is killing it. There's a poll I put out for Robert Downey Jr. movies. I put a few films from every decade of his career, and the Avengers poll has almost like 200 going on 300 votes, and
wow,
Endgame is a ton of votes. So even
wow,
modern films like that, it'd be fun to do. You know, if people want to see
yeah,
it, let's give it to them.
yeah. I know one film we talked about briefly when we were trying to look at doing maybe a more recent horror film. Was a film, I think it's called When Evil Lurks,
Yes.
which it's a foreign film and it's on a lot of people's top 10 list for the year. A lot of people really love that film, so I definitely want to see it, and it could be something for us to look at if we feel like risking something that we don't really know.
Wow.
But but yeah, a lot of people seem to really like that one. So
Mhm.
who knows?
Yeah. And also, we've talked about possibly bringing someone younger into the fold as well. Because the whole point of
Yes.
this, when we conceive the name of the show and try to finalize like what we're all about, our mission statement, is just about talking about these older movies, again, covering time and space, different countries, different eras, different, um, genres and introducing modern audiences to it, not just people who saw these films back in the day, you know? So I think
Yeah.
maybe getting someone younger and like I also said, possibly female, just so it's just not all males club. There are a couple of female reviewers that I had collaborated with in the past that I may
Yeah.
reach out to, but I think my first effort maybe to get someone local here in New York.
Oh
Um,
yes.
so maybe having the idea of physically being with someone as we're recording it will
Yeah.
is something I'll try first, and then if not, there are a couple of really good female reviewers that I'd worked with in the past that may be interested in jumping on. So that may be something we'll look into in the next couple of months as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Anything else to add before we wrap this up?
Well, the only other thing we had talked briefly about is February coming up. Um, there's a couple of things that could be themes,
Mhm.
or if not themes for the month, at least for one movie, maybe. One of them was the Valentine's Day, possibly looking at some kind of a romance film or something like
I
that.
always liked I had a soft spot for Jerry Maguire.
Oh yeah, 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 that's a good
Yeah,
one.
yeah. And
Yeah,
David Lean did a movie that's supposedly one of the greatest um romance movies of all time. Um, what the hell was the name of that movie? It's
what
with
do you
two
think of?
strangers in a subway. I know he did Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah, was it Brief
Um,
Encounter?
Brief Encounter.
Yeah,
Dr. Zhivago and Brief Encounter are supposedly two of the better romance movies as well.
yeah.
And also there's this, I think it's a Japanese film. I don't remember the title, but I know it's about two people where their spouses are having affairs,
Oh yeah,
and then they think about having an affair, they don't, but the mood of love or in the mood for
yeah,
love or something like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's it. Yeah, In the
Yeah.
Mood for Love.
So
Yeah,
just off the top of my head, those are some films we can maybe consider doing one of those maybe
yes,
for February around Valentine's Day. Maybe put some of those
yeah,
movies in a poll or something, see what our audience wants. But those would be some of the possible movies to consider. And then
yes,
maybe another thing in February is something for Black History. either getting
Yes.
back into some of the blaxploitation films we missed, or modern films like Menace to Society or Juice or
Yeah.
um, what's the other one?
Boys in the Hood.
Boys in the Hood.
Yeah.
Those are also classics that we
Yeah.
can maybe put a poll for one of those as well. So there are a couple of
Yeah.
movies we can do polls for, and I think we discussed it's better probably to stick to the polls from our YouTube audience because they're the ones actually watching the movies.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. And yeah, those are both good ideas, I think,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
February.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, for immediately we're looking at Straw Dogs, Sunset, and then we got to finalize the Robert Downey Jr. film, and then we can
Yes.
get into those February Black History and romance movies and try to get those
Yes.
done soon.
Yes. Sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. All right, man, this was fun. I mean,
Yeah.
we almost didn't do it because we couldn't think of what to do, and it ends up being one of our
Yeah.
longer episodes. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, it's surprising. You just start going and you never know where it'll take you.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun talking movies, and I think you
Yeah.
brought this idea up that we don't necessarily have to, every episode doesn't have to be us watching a movie and then analyzing. We can do other stuff, and this was fun. We didn't specifically
Yeah.
watch a movie to talk about, but this was a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
there's plenty for us to talk about movie-wise. So I'd also be open to not just those movies we talked about, but doing more episodes like this where we
Yeah.
figure out movie topics to talk about and not
Yeah.
necessarily just us sitting down watching a movie and then talking specifically about that movie for a whole episode. So if we can come up with creative ideas for shows like this, I'd be happy to do with this too.
Yeah. Me too. I think it's good to mix things up a bit, try a few different things. Why not?
Yeah, yeah. All right, we've been at this all night, so
Yeah.
let's
The No Rules Film School is closing down.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. Class is out, folks. Class is
That's
out.
right.
All right, man. I hope you had a great Christmas and Happy New Year. And
Yes.
next time we do this will be 2024.
Yeah. Hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where does the
Well,
time go?
yes. Where indeed.
Yeah.
Where indeed.
Yeah. All right, my friend. Take care.
All
I'll
right.
talk to
You
you
too.
talk to you next week.
Okay. All right.